Wow, I love that intro, and I love the work that Rebel News has been doing this past month at the Trucker Commission inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act. I am Ezra Levand. I'm the Rebel Commander. That's a fancy way of saying I'm the president of the company. And I'm sitting in our world headquarters in Toronto, Canada, but the center of the action, the center of gravity for the company this past month has been in Ottawa, in an Airbnb that we've rented for the duration of the inquiry, a month and a half. We found the closest Airbnb to the actual commission building. It's so close. It's a quick walk there. There's also 4 bedrooms there, so we can put our Rebel News staff there. And we've been rotating through journalists covering the commission every single day, covering it on location, scrumming the witnesses and sometimes the lawyers as they come and go in, sitting there, and of course, live tweeting the proceedings. And then every night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Mountain Time, we chew it over. We talk about it, not just with the journalists, but with the experts, knowledgeable guests, including some of the lawyers, some of the witnesses, some of the truckers. I'm very proud of what we're doing. And by the way, we need your help. It's not cheap to set up this whole pop-up studio office. If you can help us out, go to truckercommission.com. The Airbnb alone for a month and a half is about $15,000. I know that sounds like a lot of dough, but it's a large place, perfectly located. So I hope you'll help us out. I'm very proud of the work done by our journalists, and we've had a lot of different journalists rotate through. I was even there one day. Let me introduce to you some more teammates who are on location. I see on the screen now William Diaz-Berthiaume, who is one of the newest Rebels. He's actually based in Ottawa, and I would say that he has been leading our coverage in the city, so grateful to have him. And you can see on the screen now 2 Albertans who have been deputized to go to Ottawa and cover things on the ground. Celine Galas and Sidney Fizard, who himself was embedded with the trucker trucker convoy rather, at the Coutts border crossing in February. So what a pleasure to have 3 of my favorite Rebels. Thanks, guys and gal. Well, it's good to see you too, Celine and Sid. Nice to have you there. Well, William, you have, because you're based in Ottawa and you actually live in the downtown, you have been covering this literally every day. Before we get into the substance of it, tell me a little bit about what it's like to cover it. The very first thing that comes to my mind, and I know this is sort of an inside baseball thing, is that Rebel News has been officially accredited by this Commission of Inquiry. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, 13 of our journalists, I might be wrong on that number, have been accredited, including myself. And the commission has been very open. Members of the public can go in, but in a way, members don't even have to go in because it's being live streamed in French, in English. The documents are being put up on the website simultaneously. A couple days later, written transcripts. I have to say this is a very user-friendly, transparent Commission of Inquiry. I find that very comforting because I was worried that the whole thing would be a stitch-up. What do you think?
Well, I think that I agree with you. I think that we saw that it was indeed transparent. I think the commission is very fair. People that had doubts at the beginning that the judge was a liberal shill or a liberal party member of some sort, saw that he's able to be impartial. We see him being impartial to the Freedom Convoy lawyers, as well as to lawyers such as Paul Champ. So both on the total opposite side of the spectrum. He's very professional. He's able to remain non-biased, and I think that's some of the doubts that people had. Apart from that, the witnesses are great to hear. I think is extremely revealing, and the government of Canada officials and the government, the Liberal cabinet must be shaking their boots right now looking at the evidence that is being shown, because we all see that the Emergencies Act was helpful but not necessary. That's what every single witness that is honest says, helpful but not necessary, and I truly look forward to see the cabinet testify in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. To be very specific, this Commission of Inquiry is part of the Emergencies Act. It's a form of martial law that has actually never been used before. It's the successor legislation to the War Measures Act. And because it's such a grave undertaking to suspend civil liberties, it has built within it an accountability device that within a certain period of time, a judge must inquire as to whether or not it was necessary. And it's a very strict test, isn't it? It's sort of a two-step.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, it is a very strict step. And I was talking to Brendan Miller yesterday, and it's the whole commission is based on a book. There's a framework of the commission. It's very interesting. I'm not quite sure what the title of the book is, but it's based on a book written by a Western lawyer, I believe from Alberta. So the whole way the commission is done is extremely professional, and it is extremely serious. But at the same time, we're here because people had bouncy castles in the street. We're here because people had fun in the street. And on the opposite side, you look at lawyers such as, once again, Brendan Miller, who is representing people who is fighting in court against or for people who are murderers, who committed serious crimes. So no, it's interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned Brendan Miller. He's one of the many lawyers with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. They're doing a great job. The Democracy Fund, Alan Honor, the director of litigation there, he's also accredited as an intervener. So I think that goes to openness and transparency. Let me get back to what I was saying about what the purpose of the commission is. It's not to relitigate the politics. It's not to say, are the truckers good or bad, or even is the government good or bad. It's that wouldn't even be the role of a judge. The role is very specific. It's to see whether or not the
necessary
convoy met the crisis, or whatever you want to call it, meets the definition of a national danger, a national emergency, using language from the CSIS Act. Actually, were people in serious danger, or was the sovereignty of the country, like, was there a real revolution afoot? Those are really the two species of emergency. Was there a mass danger, or was there a danger to the country itself, like the government falling or being toppled? But then there's the second part, and was this danger something that could not be addressed by any other law?
Exactly.
So the first part is, it has to be a grave danger, not just a bad feeling or a microaggression or a political nuisance or an annoyance or a honking horn. And it's clear that this hasn't met that standard. And then even if it does, even if this was a grave danger, even if they came armed with guns, God forbid, and they didn't, even if they came to storm the parliament, even if they came to kidnap politicians, and these are extreme things I'm saying, but they did use some of these tactics in the FLQ crisis in Quebec some 52 years ago. The next part of the test is, okay, fine, so you have a grave danger. Could existing laws tackle it? And every single cop who has been asked, every single cop, every attorney general, every deputy attorney general, every police chief, every deputy police chief, every one of them has said, no, we could have solved this. In fact, many of them did solve it. The Alberta border crossing solved before the Emergencies Act was declared. The Windsor Bridge crossing at the Ambassador Bridge, which actually was the only convoy that had some economic impact, because that's a very serious bridge, solved before the Emergencies Act. So both steps of the test have not been met, and I do not think that this judge will be able to come to any conclusion, William, other than the Emergencies Act was falsely and improperly invoked. But Trudeau doesn't give a damn. He's above the law, don't you know?
Oh, I fully agree. The judge, I don't see any way. Well, the reason why we call him a judge, that he is a judge, but the real term for the commission is that he's a commissioner. He's Commissioner Rouleau, who was a judge, who is still a judge. But yeah, I don't think there's any possible truthful way that he could come to the conclusion that it was necessary. Every single witness says so. He might be, he might. I don't think he's going to be convinced by the Liberal cabinet, who will try to convince him that it was actually necessary. Every single person, as you just mentioned, we hear says the line, helpful but not necessary. When we always say we repeat, I know Celine often says that we repeat ourselves, but it's true because we keep hearing the same thing every single day. Every single day is the same story.
Well, William, I just want to say on a personal note, I'm very grateful to the work you've done. I like to joke that when you joined us, I didn't even know you were 17, and I hope you're not embarrassed by me mentioning that. You come across as so wise and mature for your years, and I know you just turned 18. What a pleasure to have you on the team. I think you've been a real star, and thank you for your deep commitment to citizen journalism. I think you've done a hell of a job, so thank you. Let me bring in your Western colleagues who've been sitting there patiently. Celine Galas. Now, Celine,
thank you.
You were one of the first rebels to deal with the trucker convoy. In fact, you were embedded with the main convoy as it left Calgary in January. So days before it even got to Ottawa, you and our chief videographer, Mocha Bazirgan, accompanied it. And we didn't know then what would become of it. We didn't know. Everyone just knew go to Ottawa. It wasn't quite clear what would happen or what the plan was. It was very organic. Tell us a little bit about what it was like in the convoy before it even got to Ottawa.
Yeah, it was an incredible time. I mean, there was just almost, it was since we were all in such disbelief, I believe, particularly when you would see, you know, the hours and hours that it took to drive. We drove usually within the convoy for 9 to 11, 12 hours sometimes, making sure that we could keep up with them because they wouldn't stop. Like, these people were definitely on a mission, and the cold weather, the road conditions, nothing got in the way. But with all those things being said, what was incredible was seeing, literally not even an over-exaggeration, the thousands of people that lined the sides of the highway, sometimes even between like major cities. There would still be people there supporting the truckers because you could fast track their route. It was online. They always gave notice to where they would be staying or the cities that they would be staying overnight. So that was really incredible. And then once again, this was January, February. So January, just at the very end, right before the convoy landed in Ottawa, the road conditions were absolutely terrible. They were scary. But with very, very few accidents or anything like that, all the truckers made it. We made it very safely, but it was all these things that kind of contributed to this journey that you didn't really expect to, you know, you just think like, oh, this is so incredible. The tensions are really high. And all of a sudden you find yourself embedded in this convoy in a slow roll for 9 to 12 hours every single day. So we got to stop off in some areas and interview these truckers and talk to them about, you know, not just what the government thought or what they thought about the government declaring them as a small fringe minority or misogynist or domestic terrorists, but we also got to hear their stories. We got to hear why they would decide to go on this crazy long trip. Some truckers, again, coming all the way from the coast of British Columbia to Ottawa. And so that was really interesting to be able to connect with them so deeply and then be able to show that to viewers because it was, in fact, not a small fringe minority. And you can see that when we will, I suspect, go more in depth about some of the findings that we've had in the commission. The OPS was very, very, very overwhelmed by the amount of truckers that came and parked themselves in Ottawa. And it's because they were following mainstream media, and that was admitted. Yeah. So they were following fake news.
That's a great point. Shalene, I just want to remind our viewers what we're doing. This live stream, we have a live stream typically every day at 6 p.m. Eastern. Today, the commission is off. I think the Remembrance Day memorial is the reason for that. So it's sort of a halfway, almost not quite exactly halfway through the commission. And besides just recapping things, we've got about a dozen video clips from the commission, and we're going to play those in a moment. But we're just setting the scene a little bit, reminding folks why we are in Ottawa, where you are. It looks like you're in the kitchen. You are in a kitchen. We made a kitchen studio in the Airbnb, which is fun, and it's really close to, like, it's in the middle of the action of Ottawa. I enjoyed my brief day there, and I'll have to go back. Before I go on to Sydney, I just want to mention what you described there. Traveling up to 11, maybe even more hours a day, talking to people, getting to know them, the feeling of camaraderie, seeing the different... That's actually journalism. That's getting to know a subject, getting to know a story, pointing your camera at things and showing it, asking basic who, what, where, why, when questions, showing some curiosity. That's really journalism. And yet, as far as I know, not a single mainstream media journalist was embedded, traveled along with the truckers anywhere. Like, other than Rebel News, I don't think there was a journalist who embedded themselves. And we knew in our bones very early that this would be a big thing. And it's just incredible to me, the lack of curiosity by the I mean, aren't you curious? This is a spontaneous, or is it not spontaneous? Is it, as the CBC said, organized by Vladimir Putin? Well, why don't you send someone down and see if there's Russian messages? I mean, like if you're skeptical, I mean, send a skeptical reporter, send someone instead of just taking your talking points from the PMO. So what you described, the cold is part of the story. I went down to the Convoy in Ottawa. It was bloody cold. Now, I wasn't dressed properly. I'm an idiot. But it was so cold. That's part of the story, too. To have thousands of people in minus 20-degree weather, that's dedication. That's not some professional political, rent-a-mob that shows up only if they're paid or something like the left often has. These were people who have likely never protested in their life before. Truckers are too busy working to protest. And it was such a phenomenon, and the sheer lack of curiosity and interest by the media party is stunning. And while, of course, this commission of inquiry is showing that the police and the politicians had no basis for their brutality, it's also an indictment of the media party, because time and again we have heard witnesses say that all the scandal, all the rumors were being whipped up by the mainstream media, rumors of violence, rumors of assault, yet not a single witness, either a layperson, a citizen, or a cop, has said, yeah, I saw violence.
That's right.
In fact, we have a clip a little bit later of Steve Bell. In fact, why don't we do it right now? Let's go to clip number 5. This is Steve Bell, perhaps the worst cop in the country. Now, I know Brenda Lucki, the RCMP commissioner, by some measures is the worst cop in the country. But in terms of sheer odious malice, in terms of abuse and threats, in terms of violating his oath, I believe that Steve Bell, who was just replaced as the chief of police in Ottawa, I think he's the worst cop I have ever seen at that rank. Here's clip 5, where he was forced to admit there actually was no violence. And so this, I'm going to call him a dirty cop, because I think that applies here, not in the terms of corruption like taking a bribe, but doing political errands while wearing a badge. Take off the goddamn badge, you liberal hack, if you want to be a liberal hack. You put that badge on, you're a cop with an oath. Look at this dirty cop running errands for Trudeau. Take a look at clip number 5.
In your evidence in chief, you kept using the word violence regarding protesters, right?
Yes.
All right. And you've heard the evidence of Superintendent Morris already. You sort of touched on that. And he had stated that the lack of violence in Ottawa during the protest was actually shocking.
So I don't recall that statement.
All right. So is it fair to say that when you use the phrase violence, you're not actually describing any form of physical assaults, are you? Well,
physical assaults do contribute to what I'm describing. I was specifically describing the violence that our community felt as a result of the culmination of actions that the occupiers engaged in.
So the violence that they felt, not actual violence, is that what you're saying?
That is correct. Not the criminal code definition of violence, but the violence that they felt by having incessant horns blared.
Right. And
by having trucks run 24/7 a day.
Right.
By having people intimidate them and follow them, and by having people rip masks off their head, by feeling sheltered in their homes.
Well, thank you. I understand what you mean. But you're not talking about violence under Section 2 of the CSIS Act, are you?
No, I'm not.
Thanks.
What a disgrace that dirty cop is. And you know what? By the way, there was even a lie embedded in his answer, people ripping masks off faces. That was inquired in detail by the commission. That was a wicked lie. That wicked, dirty cop should be drummed out of the force. If there were justice, he himself should be put on trial. Instead, he'll probably be given some plum patronage position for running errands. By the way, I am advised that we have a special guest on standby. I'm going to go to Sydney Fizzard next, but then we're going to talk with a trucker who was part of the convoy at the Coutts border blockade between Coutts and between the border of Alberta and Montana, who was holed up there with Sydney Fizzard and who is actually being charged and is being prosecuted. And Rebel News is crowdfunding his legal defense. I'm talking about Marco van Huygenbos, and he'll be with us in just a moment. But before we go to Marco, we're going to talk to Sydney Fazard. Sydney, thank you for waiting so patiently. I remember when you and Kian Simone were in our Calgary office, and we heard that the truckers were mustering at the other border crossing. There's a bunch of border crossings in Canada, this one in Coutts, Alberta. And in my bones, I knew that was going to be interesting. And I said, hey, guys, go down there. And I don't think you guys even packed a second change of clothes. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you wound up being down there for the duration. Tell us a little bit about what it was like. Again, just physically, you hop in your car. I don't think you'd ever been to Coutts, Alberta before. I think you're originally from Ontario. You're in our Calgary office. You're doing Calgary journalism. And you go to this tiny town, population 245. Like it's not even a town. I don't even know if it's a village or if it's incorporated. You go down to Coutts, Alberta. What was it like? What did you see? And what did you think when you came upon all those trucks?
It was an incredible experience. And you mentioned I haven't been to Coutts before. Well, to be fair, not many people have been to Coutts. It's a very small, very, very small town village. It's a small border. On one side, it's Coutts, and on the other side, it's Sweetgrass. And these communities are very laced in with each other. So immediately, there's kind of an understanding that a lot of the grievances that would be expressed by the COVID mandates and restrictions that were put in place, especially on the border with the Americans, there's a lot of issues stemming from that. And as we found out, many of the people, the residents of Coutts, were also in strong support of what was coming their way, which was at first a slow roll convoy that was in support of the Freedom Convoy that was approaching Ottawa. And there were thousands of people, quite literally. And over the duration, it would not surprise me if tens and tens of thousands of people had arrived and made their way through at certain points. And what ended up happening was, I believe, roughly on January 29th, is the slow roll. It was so congested. There was so much traffic and everything like that. And there's a lot of people who were kind of like, well, we're kind of already stopped. What's to stop this from turning into a blockade, or being a blockade, I guess you could say. And from that, the Coutts blockade, as it's now known, arose. And we see some of the footage here. This is the Smuggler's Saloon the Smuggler's Saloon on screen that we're looking at. This is the little shack that was right beside the highway where all of these demonstrators, they kind of, that was the collection point. That was the area, that was where the bathrooms were, that was where the food was coming from, because with that many people, there had to be some kind of organization so that everyone was fed and taken care of. And that's exactly what we did. And we see this individual actually on screen. Kian filmed this, Kian Simone, who's here as well. These two individuals were temporarily stuck behind the blockade, and the truckers went out to talk to them, be like, look, we don't mean to inconvenience you. Apparently you were let through the border, even though we told the border that the blockade was here. And they offered them food, help, anything they needed. And what did they do? They went in, they got some food, they believe they got some coffees or some other stuff. They actually signed the Canadian flag that was in there. And that just shows you, the support for this movement was quite all over. And even within the province of Alberta, there was decentralized blockade action happening across the province in conjunction with the Coutts blockade, and consequently in conjunction with the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. It was the Coutts blockade, but it was quite literally the province acting up.
The reason the size of Coutts is relevant, 245 people. I don't even know if it's an incorporated entity. I think it's just a place. And that saloon is like the hub of it. And the population of the location doubled or more during the convoy. Now, you'll notice there's on the screen now, there's farm vehicles. Those are big tractors or other farm equipment. Yes, there are trucks, of course, but a lot of those vehicles, and those are very, very large farming. That's a tractor on the left. I didn't know there were some construction style vehicles. I don't know the terminology. I see, anyway, just incredibly large vehicles. Oh, look at that. Someone who was giving a shout out to Rebel News. That's great. That's a combine, I think. When you have a convoy in a city like Windsor, Ontario, which is a large city, or a city like Ottawa, again, a large city, you have a large urban police force with specialists like SWAT teams, probably helicopters, and you can call on other backup from other police forces nearby. When I was in Ottawa, there were police from all over Ontario who had been sent there. Coutts, Alberta is a different story. I don't even other than maybe a border cop, I don't even know if there would be a policeman stationed in the town. I think they're probably up at Milk River, an hour away. So if you have 100 trucks and farm equipment vehicles blocking, like you just can't move them away like maybe you could in Toronto, Ottawa, Windsor, whatever, a big city. And, you know, if you want to have some sort of physical showdown, there's just numerically you're outgunned. So this was a very different vibe than Ottawa with its riot horses stomping on people, hundreds and hundreds of cops smacking billy clubs. This was the opposite. This was hundreds of grassroots citizens and a handful of cops who had no clue what to do and no ability to do it. Don't you think, Sid?
Oh, absolutely. And I can't understate the effect of the Milk River demonstrations that were taking place as well. Because, you know, there's the, as Kenny said, you know, 170 or whatever trucks on the road. He was minimizing it. But realistically, there was a separate police barrier that was set up in Milk River, and this Milk River demonstration began to ensue because there's thousands of people that were trying to get the Coutts to join the blockade who were being prevented by the RCMP.
Oh.
And it is my understanding, I believe, that the RCMP would have been the authority of jurisdiction because, you know, small town Alberta, there is no city police force, especially in Coutts, right? Yeah. So a lot of the burden does fall on their shoulders in this situation as well.
Isn't that interesting? You know, just like in Ottawa, the roads were blocked by the police as much as by the truckers. When I was in Ottawa, it was the police that were locking down every intersection. To this day, many roads in Ottawa are closed by the police. I find it very bizarre. Same thing in Alberta. It was the police who blocked off access to the border. Well, listen, it is the bottom of the hour. We've been chatting for half an hour. It's a bit of a catch-up for me. We do have a lot more video clips, but without further delay, I want to go to the man of the hour, Marco van Huigenbos. He's a town councillor from Fort Macleod, Alberta, not too far away from Coutts. Fort Macleod is near Lethbridge, which is a larger city in southern Alberta. He's a town councillor. I had the pleasure of meeting him last weekend in Lethbridge when he briefly appeared in court with two other truckers who are being prosecuted for inciting mischief. I think that's the species of crime. Now, mischief is the kind of charge that is often given out for vandalism or spray painting something. It's the kind of thing normally you get a slap on the wrist and the judge says, I don't want to see you back in this court again. Fly straight, youngster. But no, the Crown is proceeding by what they call indictment. I understand that the government wants 10 years in prison for Marco, Alex, and George, his other two truckers, completely nonviolent. I say again, Marco himself is a town councillor. He's an upstanding citizen, a leader of his community, and he's actually in Ottawa because he was testifying before the commission. Do we have Marco in the studio?
Yes, we do.
You know what? We're going to have a quick ad break. Oh, no, there he is. No need for an ad break. Marco, how you doing? Nice to see you.
Good to see you, Ezra. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, and thanks for waiting patiently. I understand you've been there, and welcome to our little pop-up studio in Ottawa in our Airbnb. Now, you last I saw you were in Lethbridge, and you were one of the three defendants. And I know you have to be careful about what you say publicly because, of course, the prosecution will be watching this, and they'll want to scrutinize any word and use it to hang you. So I'm not going to ask you anything about the case. But maybe you can tell me, without referring to anything that would touch on your trial, I want to be careful for you. Why were you there? Why were hundreds or maybe even thousands of men and women from all across southern Alberta and other places streaming in? Why did they feel it was important to peacefully protest that day in February?
We were there to stand up to a government gone rogue. During the 18 months at that time of COVID, we had seen our local municipalities, our boards, all of the powers that are given us through our Westminster parliamentary democracy, essentially put in a box and put on a top shelf. And Kenny, with his PIC committee and the authorities given to AHS through their emergency measures, were running the province. And the inability to communicate with our elected officials drove us to a place that essentially drove us to Coutts. That was where we made the stand to demand accountability from our representatives.
And the mayor of Coutts, and again, mayor is a big word for a place of two. I was a student council rep in in school, and I had more constituents than the mayor of Coutts does. But he is the mayor. Tell me how the local town reacted. Like everyone knew people who were on the line, and there may have been disagreements about it, but these were not strangers. These were friends and neighbors and family in many cases, weren't they?
Correct. I'm not from the Coutts area, from Warner County, but a lot of the individuals, a lot of the residents of Milk River and Coutts supported this. The mayor himself testified that it was probably a 70-30 split, and it comes back to 70-30 split. 30% of the people might not have agreed with certain tactics that were being used, but to say they didn't support us, I would disagree with that. I believe all of Alberta supported us, but being an organic event, there's things that happened that we that were out of our control. We responded to it, right? It's essentially, we built the plane as we were flying it. I've heard that comment a few times this week, but to say 70-30, I think that's a pretty accurate description. And it but to back to that 30%, I never really interacted with that 30%, so I can't attest to that. But the support was there from the communities surrounding surrounding Coutts and the county.
Yeah, we're looking on screen of different imagery. That's our friend Kian Simone, who along with Sidney Fazard was down there for the bulk of it. Very interesting to be embedded with the truckers. They were right there in the saloon. They watched the negotiations. Tell me about the role of, I remember getting a phone call from Sid and Kian about how it was going, and there was a worry that the RCMP negotiators were not negotiating in good faith, that they were misleading, that they were sort of silver-tongued devils and tricking folks. And I thought, boy, there's a chance that's going to go wrong. So we mustered some crowdfunding money, and we sent down a lawyer, Chad Williamson, who I think was a perfect fit for this project. And Chad is representing you and the other two truckers. There's Chad right there. But he's representing you in court now. But back then, he was sort of a go-between, just to make sure that everyone knew their rights and to liaise with the cops so that they had someone. I'm not saying that the truckers were unsophisticated. I'm just saying that they aren't used to hard-bitten negotiation with tough hombres on the other side. That's what a lawyer does every day. A litigating lawyer fights against another side all the time, every day. That's how they're mentally trained, whereas a trucker is a friend to all. He's not getting into fights. So you put a bunch of truckers in a room, then you send in these silver-tongued devils from the RCMP. That's not actually a level playing field. You add Chad Williamson to the game. Okay, now it's a level playing field. That's at least how I think of it, but I wasn't there. How was it? Did Chad fulfill that kind of a role when he was there as a liaison?
Absolutely. Chad with his colleague Martin, they came down and they, in layman's terms, explained what we were up against and what could happen, and if it happened, how we had to respond. You have a right to a lawyer. I remember the exact terminology. I think it was something yes, no, or but it was in the event of arrests, and we felt that would be what it came to. We weren't going to resist. We weren't going to fight back, but we were going to stand our ground. And we also knew that eventually, systematically, the government would have to remove us. We were aware of that. We made that decision, and that decision when you have truckers and farmers and families who come down there knowing they could go into the world of legal prosecution, something they're not aware of, something they're not familiar with, but showed up anyways and stood their ground. That was powerful.
It was amazing. We were showing on the screen there, men and women, truckers, farmers. I think they were singing "O Canada." One fella had his hat off over his heart. We also saw about 20 cops, and again, so those are the truckers there. I think this was sort of the showdown day where a bunch of truckers came and were basically saying, you got to get out now. But you can just see what I mentioned earlier. Ottawa, Windsor, those are big cities with big police forces. You could get 300, 400, 500 cops, a SWAT team, riot horses, helicopter dispatched, in a matter of hours in those cities. But in Coutts, Alberta, the best the cops could muster was 20 folks, and the exuberance and the sheer numbers and the flat open spaces. Those cops were showing it on camera now. They turned and walked away. Like they thought they could get the truckers to blink. The truckers didn't blink. The cops blinked. I thought that was a fascinating moment.
That was an extremely powerful moment. That was the Tuesday of the first week. I remember that clear as day. I remember their first attempt, and this syncs with that the farmers and the truckers breaking the very preliminary Milk River blockade at that time. They blew through there. You might have seen videos of that previously, but they had made the attempt and had essentially told a few truckers, because we didn't have a barricade, we didn't have a barrier, we just had trucks on the highway facing east and west, so we had no real way to stand our ground in a way that the RCMP would have to essentially come to a standoff with us. And they had convinced a few truckers to leave by just essentially saying, you're leaving or you're getting arrested. So that's a pretty obvious decision. But out of the, it was a pretty the weather was pretty crappy. Out of the blue, I would say blue, but out of the white came these truckers and these farmers who had seen on the social media platforms that the RCMP was enforcing in Coutts, and they could not watch that happen to their friends, to their families, to their fellow Albertans. So they broke through that barrier, and the timing of that was just phenomenal. It wasn't planned, but the timing. And when they showed up, we ended up taking that equipment and forming a fence-to-fence metal barrier with equipment, trucks and trailers and farm implements. I remember this one tractor coming in with a big double disc, and it just parked on the highway and it folded its wings down, and there it was. And the RCMP had essentially retreated when those trucks and tractors rolled in. And they made one more attempt, and that's when the protesters came out of the saloon and came from their trucks, etc., because it was -30 and with wind chill. And we formed a line and we stood in front of that barricade and we sang "O Canada." And I remember, clearly indicating, we maintain our distance. We wanted a no contact. That was our goal, and we were successful with that. The numbers and the force that was presented with equipment and the people on that highway turned the enforcement effort into a failure, and the RCMP took an approach that led to more of that essentially led to negotiations going forward.
Now, we're gathered here today because we're talking about the Trucker Commission of Inquiry and whether or not the use of the Emergencies Act was legally, morally, constitutionally, politically justified. It's pretty clear that the answer to that is no. And the way I know that is that your blockade, which was by far the most effective in the country, was resolved before the Emergencies Act was deployed. It was resolved. Right. Tell me a little bit about your testimony before the Trucker Commission this week.
Yeah, so I got subpoenaed a couple months ago, and obviously leading up to it, not sure, how it would transpire. So I watched a lot of it from Alberta. This is not something that has ever happened. Essentially, the Emergencies Act has never been enacted, so the inquiry has never been necessary. So becoming familiar with the proceedings, etc., I remember showing up a couple days early and just getting my feel of the room, but going in prepared. I sat down with Martin, my legal counsel, who was sponsored by TDF, and my criminal lawyer, Yoav Niv, who works with Chad from Williamson Law. We did a lot of preliminary prep, and I came in and I was able to articulate well and speak to what, I was subpoenaed, but there was also a willingness on my part to get in front of the commission, to get in front of the country, and to share the truth of what happened in Coutts. That the truth of what happened has never been fully shared, and a lot of the truth cannot be shared yet, as there's legal prosecution. But the narrative in the mainstream media has changed from an event, a peaceful event, where there were unfortunately situations outside of the main blockade that cast a bad light on us, but it was separate. But over the last 10 months, that separation has diminished, and now all of Coutts, it essentially goes back to the way the media paints this now, is that every trucker was on that highway holding a gun, and that's ridiculous. So that was part of my goal, was to come to the commission and to share the truth of that, and to also share that it was not necessary. We're in Alberta, we're in Coutts. Like, no disrespect to the people in this great city, but who's Ottawa to us? Ottawa is this faraway place for us, and we understand the role of Ottawa. But the Emergencies Act, I might have heard about it, but that was not something that made me shake in my boots. That we had gone there with the goal to communicate with or to demand accountability of our provincial government. But when things turned to the situation on hand, we were prepared. We were prepared to make that stand. So there was nothing in the Emergencies Act that was going to change that situation. So in leaving, our decision and the timing of it, which is public, has nothing to do with the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And that had to be shared from my part. And unfortunately, and this is you probably lead to this in your questioning, but unfortunately, the government of Alberta, in their cross-examination of me, and even the testimony of the Deputy Justice Minister a day or two later, was very vague in this. It was, if their goal as the province of Alberta, which they also believe that the Emergencies Act was not necessary, and that's why they requested standing at the commission. But I'm surprised as to how they represented. The government of Alberta, the council, essentially put me on the stand. It was a prosecution of Marco Van Hugenbos in Ottawa. And
that's obviously a holdover from Jason Kenney's regime. The new Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, is more sympathetic to freedom and more critical of lockdownism, but obviously she's only been in the office for a few weeks. And you have all these, in fact, the prosecution of you and George and Marco, you're Marco, excuse me, and Alex. The prosecution of you three peaceful protesters was started under Kenney in his last month as Premier.
Correct. Yeah.
And now it's like a zombie that's operating under its own energy. And I think the Premier has to call it off. And I think it's absurd, the demand for 10 years in prison. I think your lawyer is right when he said last weekend at the rally outside the courthouse that there's no jury in Lethbridge that would convict. Like, if 70% of the people of Coutts were in support, and their town was being blockaded, but still 70% of them supported it, you're not going to find a jury to convict in Lethbridge. This is pure vendetta. But you know what, Marco, and I appreciate your time today. We got your back, and when I mean that, I don't just mean we have your back morally and journalistically, but as you know, we're crowdfunding the legal defense. You mentioned the lawyers, Chad Williamson. He's got a couple colleagues. You all have, Neve is one of them. We even put up some digital billboards around Lethbridge. I saw one with my own eyes. And the website we set up is truckerdefensefund.com, truckerdefensefund.com. Because I think those are the three men there. There's Marco, that's you on the right, and then that's George in the middle, and then that's Alex on the left. I had the pleasure of meeting all three of you at the courthouse last weekend for the first time. And I was very glad I came down there. There's me early in the morning. My face is blue because there's a police light flashing. I got there very early, and police in Lethbridge, there were police with their flashers on every single street corner. I don't know what they were expecting, if they were expecting Lethbridge to be locked down by the convoys. I don't know. But this is all about intimidating you, overwhelming you, stressing you out, bankrupting you, taking up all your time and money. And we can help with some of that, namely the money side. And so we have committed, and I made this commitment to the truckers when you were in the saloon. I remember that our reporters were in the saloon with you. And they called me, and I was at home. It was dinner time. It was after dinner in Toronto. That's where I live. And I got the call from the lads. And he put me on speakerphone, and we chatted back and forth. And I said, fellas, we'll crowdfund a lawyer to help. And if any of you get charged, we'll crowdfund the lawyer to defend. And that has come to pass. And so I went down there to Lethbridge to see you guys, look you in the eye and say, we're going to help you. Now, I myself am not independently wealthy, but if we have enough ordinary people chipping in $10, $50, $100, we can pay for a whole trial. It's going to be an expensive trial. Yeah, you can see that's me speaking with my face reflecting the flashers. It was crazy. Like every street corner in downtown Lethbridge had a police car with flashers on. You can see I was standing right, they're still crazy. The cops down there are still mad. At the courthouse, they had 20 cops. I said to one of them, is there some trial of a drug kingpin? Is El Chapo inside or something? And I made a joke to one of them, all you need is a police helicopter. He said, yeah, I wish we had one. Yeah, brother, I think you're going after the wrong bad guys here. So folks, if you can help out at truckerdefensefund.com, Rebel News is paying for Chad Williamson and the rest of his firm to defend Marco, George, and Alex. Listen, you be generous with your time. It's nice to see you. I'm glad you're in the nation's capital. I'm glad you had a chance to put your side of the story on the record. I'm disappointed but not surprised that the Alberta government thought they'd try and put you on trial. That's the same government that imploded on itself because of its abuse of lockdowns. I mean, it's quite something that Jason Kenney, once the leading politician on the right in Canada, didn't even finish his term, and it's because of this abusiveness. I'll give you the last word, Marco, before you head back west. Are you hopeful? Do you think the Trucker Commission of Inquiry will do a good job? You just give me your reflections. As you said, this is a whole new thing for you. You've never been subpoenaed before. You've never, participated in a hearing like this before. You've never been charged with a crime like this before. Give me your thoughts.
Well, we're definitely hopeful. We always have to remain hopeful. Otherwise, what is the fight for? But as to any real consequences, I'm concerned we're not going to see a lot. We may see some minister take the fall, but to see anything actually change, I don't believe that will happen, and that's very unfortunate because the goals of Coutts, Emerson, Sarnia, Windsor, at Ottawa specifically, it was a demand for accountability. Our representatives have forgotten who they represent, and like I keep on saying, if for trust to be rebuilt, we need to see accountability, and this is just one part of that process.
Well, stay there for one more second. I want to play clip number 2, which is Trudeau when he was asked, would he resign if there was no justification for his invocation of the Emergencies Act? And here's how that exchange went. Take a look.
Inquiry that starts today, 65 witnesses over 30 days. When it's all wrapped up, and the commissioner, if he finds that there was no justification for the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Act, should there be consequences for the federal government, including your resignation?
But we knew from the very beginning that invoking the Emergencies Act is a big step. It had never been done before, but given these unprecedented illegal protests, we needed to take action. We took it in a way that was measured, that was responsible, that was time limited, and we knew full well that there needed to be a public inquiry. Canadians need that level of transparency and accountability, and that's why we launched this inquiry. That's why I'm so happy to be, why I offered from the beginning to be part of appearing at this commission, and we're going to make sure that Canadians see the situation we were facing and how the tools we used were appropriate.
Sure, but if it's found that there was no justification for it, again, what should the consequences be for that?
I think the important thing is for Canadians to understand the situation we were in and the choices we make. We didn't enter into using the Emergencies Act lightly. We used it with a sense of it was the necessary tool at the time. We used it in a way that was measured and proportionate, and we're really pleased that the Commission is going to be able to hear from all these witnesses, and that was why I offered to appear.
What an odious tyrant. Of course he's not going to resign if and when the Commission finds it was unjustified. Here's a man who's been convicted under the Conflict of Interest Act more times than any other Prime Minister in history combined. Of course he doesn't resign. He laughs at it. Here's a man where mere hours after the federal court ruled that he must accredit Rebel News journalists to the debate commission, and when we ask him questions, he says, I don't have to. Well, actually, the judge just said you do, and you're violating our charter rights for not. He's a petty man who's a son of privilege who doesn't believe the law applies to him. Of course, he will not resign if and when he's found to have abusively used this law. And of course, the media party will let him get away with it. Even in his answer there, he used the phrase illegal protest. That's not a thing in Canada. If you're engaged in a riot, that's illegal. But protests, by definition, are not illegal. Nonviolent protests are not illegal. He's a wicked liar. And of course, he'll skate as he always does. Marco, last word to you. I know I said that before, but I just wanted to play that Trudeau clip. I'll say a last word to you, and then we'll throw to a commercial. And we do have other guests on standby. It's almost the top of the hour, and I've gone a little slowly here. We got a lot of clips. My colleague Lincoln Jay is going to take over for me in the chair here. But Marco, it's a pleasure to talk to you. What message will you bring back to Fort Macleod and Lethbridge, and if you return to Coutts, from your journey to Ottawa? Do you think justice will be done? Let me ask you that. Do you think Canada is still the Canada you thought it was and grew up in?
It's not the Canada that we grew up in. That's a tough question. Yeah. There is hope. I believe that's why we're here. I believe that's why we stood up. But we have no choice. There is no last frontier somewhere else. This is it. And specifically Alberta, we look at that. It's Alberta, and there's a remnant there that speaks to generations past, and we have to fight. We have to protect that. And ultimately, my goal to come down to the commission was to share a truth and to fight that. It was a fact gathering journey, and I just hope that Tyler Shandro and his ministry do what they plan to do and hold Trudeau accountable instead of fighting Albertans like they have for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. Marco Van Hugenbos, nice to see you again. Thanks for appearing on the show for such an extended period. I'm going to say goodbye to you now, and we're going to roll some short ads, and when we return, in my place will be my colleague Lincoln Jay, and we'll go back to you in the studio there, our colleagues Celine and Sid, and we'll continue our special broadcast at about the halfway point in the Trucker Commission of Inquiry. So it's a pleasure sitting with you this past hour. Marco, thank you very much. We'll say goodbye to you, and stay with us because there's more ahead after these messages.
Oh, hey guys, have you checked out our Rebel News store lately? You really should, because we're always adding fun things into the store. As the news changes, I guess so does the merchandise. We've got something for everybody. We've got a great selection of pro-trucker merchandise, like this excellent honk honk shirt right here that will surely drive all your liberal friends and relatives absolutely crazy, although I don't think the trip is all that far. But right now, in the store, this is my very favorite t-shirt, and I know t-shirts. Free Tamara in support of Convoy leader Tamara Leach, as she is treated like a common terrorist by Justin Trudeau's government for her role in the peaceful weeks-long street party against COVID mandates in Ottawa. I've got great news though, if you can't decide which shirt is your favorite, because right now at rebelnewsstore.com, you can use the coupon code FALL, F-A-L-L, and buy 2 t-shirts and get 25% off. And as always, shipping is free. So head on over to rebelnewsstore.com, pick your 2 favorite t-shirts, and save 25%. Thanks, and remember, free Tamara.
Freedom in the year 2022, for me, folks, it means the return of Rebel Live. Now, Rebel Live is an annual event we used to put on before the man, or was it the COVID Karen, made us shut it down during the pandemic years. It is a freedom fun fest, if you will. All the freedom fighters you've grown to know and love over the years, they're going to be speaking at the Toronto and Calgary events. The Toronto event is on November 19th. That's a Saturday, and it will feature the likes of Dr. Julie Ponesse, Archer Pawlowski, Tamara Leach, and all your favorite rebels, including yours truly. I'll be the MC that day. Sheila Gunn Reid, and of course, the big boss man himself, Ezra Levant. Now Saturday, November the 26th, we're bringing Rebel Live to Calgary, and those aforementioned speakers will be there, and Sheila will be the MC for that event. You don't want to miss it. It's an all-day freedom fest. I know there are certain would-be conservative leaders that think freedom is overrated. You know, we don't think that way. I don't think you think that way. So if you want to get a ticket, please go to the website. They are going fast. Go to rebelnewslive.com. That's rebelnewslive.com. Get your orders in, and as Billy Red Lions used to say, folks, don't you dare miss it.
Don't you dare miss this one.
Freedom in 2022 is not sitting idly by while health diktats with no skin in the game make up all the rules. If you're like me and want to play an active role in upholding civil liberties and freedoms for all Canadians, for our children, and eventually our grandchildren, then come out to our Rebel Live event and get to know us in person while hearing from some of the most influential leaders in the freedom movement. We have events in Toronto on November the 19th and in Calgary on Saturday, November 26th. Tickets are on sale now at rebelnewslive.com. Come out, have lunch, get some Rebel swag, meet the Rebels, and more. You don't want to miss this event. Check it out, rebelnewslive.com.
We're back with Lincoln J in Toronto. Ezra, bye-bye Ezra. So I am back here. We are with Lincoln J. Lincoln, how are you doing?
Good, William. How's it going, guys?
Oh, it's going perfect. In addition to the great Lincoln J from Toronto, we also have, as seen on TV, we have Tom Marazzo here in our Ottawa studio. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm good.
So you dressed up today. I like seeing the dress shirt.
I did.
Now you're more dressed than me. Now it's 2 times that I'm less dressed than you.
That happens sometimes.
That's
Not
bad.
always, but every once in a while.
I'm gonna wear a suit
But
next time.
we're both more dressed up than Lincoln.
That's right. And you know,
That's a given.
Another difference that you have with Lincoln is that Lincoln has a puppy straight from the Legion, same as me and Celine. But Hugh, if you look at, I don't know if it's possible to see on the camera if you go a little bit more to the right. Yeah, you're a puppy. You drew it yourself, so you didn't buy one from the Legion. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, so that seemed to be a little bit of a hot topic on social media the last couple of days. What I have is I actually made the poppy out of some red paper that I had, and I have my Veterans for Freedom pin right in the middle, holding on to it. And I have decided that based on the conduct of the Royal Canadian Legion over the last two Remembrance days, that I just didn't really feel like I could morally support the Legion anymore. And as a veteran, I'm a lifelong member. All veterans are lifelong members of the Royal Canadian Legion, but even as of today, there's branch 129, I think, in the town of Preston. You can't get in unless you show proof of vaccination. So that's one issue here that I find very contradictory to the ethos of what Canadians are, joining the military to try to do. The second thing is they were absolutely deplorable in their treatment in many of the legions, not all, but many of the legions out east when James Topp was walking across Canada and in the eastern provinces, and refused to allow him and actually canceled events that he was at, saying in that he was basically a racist. And James Topp has 5 deployments, in a 27-year career in the Canadian military, right. I think going on 28. Now, the third thing was, you combine that with the fact that last week they were advertising and renting out their space to a drag queen show full of children. So it's just a bridge too far for me. So it is my own personal decision. I still wear the poppy. It's a symbol of Remembrance Day, but I made my own, and I have my Veterans for Freedom pin in the center of it.
Yeah, well, I think there's different ways to look at the puppy. The puppy, I think, at its genesis has nothing to do with the Legion. I think it has to do with Flanders Field, and it is a symbol for the veterans, which is the reason why I'm wearing it today. When I think about the puppy, I don't think about the Legion. I think most people who look at the puppy don't even think about the Legion. They think about the veterans.
Well,
so
the
I think
reality
there's this way to look at it, but there's the other way that's totally valid as well, the way I should look at it when you see the Legion.
The thing is that the poppy, the Royal Canadian Legion owns the rights to the poppy. And the only place you can get a poppy is through the Royal Canadian Legion. So yes, it does come from Flanders Fields, but they own the rights to the poppy you're wearing. So for me, I don't judge, I don't criticize. It's just a personal decision that I made for myself. So what other people do is their business.
Yeah, no, I was just curious to hear about that. And I think that you were at the War Memorial this morning.
I did.
During the ceremony for November 11. How was it being there?
It was good. There was a huge crowd there. I would estimate, 8 to 10,000 people had attended this year. We were quite far back. I attended with both Bathsheba Vandenberg, one of my lawyers, as well as Eva Chippy, one of my lawyers, in attendance with Tamara Lich, right? And here's the irony, in a so-called free country, Tamara Lich is not allowed to attend that in my presence without a lawyer being there in between us. And it was strange because we noticed that there was a couple of Ottawa police officers behind us at all times that seemed to appear out of nowhere. So
that's right. You made sure to have Eva between you and Tamara the whole time. There's another thing too from the memorial this morning. There was a speech that was given by, I'm not sure who was giving the speech, but in the speech, it was an extremely interesting speech and it reminded me of Tamara Lich. They spoke about freedom of speech. They spoke about the right to protest in Canada, how privileged we are to have freedom of speech in our country. And then I think I looked over to Bath or Tamara or both of them and Eva. And I was like, that's not what we've been seeing.
Not what we've been seeing at all.
Convoy. And this speech resembled so much to the speech that we heard from Tamara Lich. And Tamara Lich, when she spoke about this exact topic, was called a fascist, a white supremacist, a far-right extremist, all the worst names that you can imagine. But it was a good speech, and it is true. We are a country that is supposed to value freedom of speech. We have veterans that died on the field to protect our right, to defend our right to say what we want.
Well, a week ago today, we heard testimony of a veteran that was beaten on those steps back on February 18th and 19th. Right? You saw the footage. It's all over the internet. It's a real thing. It did actually happen in this country on those steps at the National War Memorial. And that was only a week ago that Canadians actually got to hear the testimony.
What'd you make of that?
I think that it's horrendous, and we were talking about the way that veterans are treated now. But yeah, to have all these things be coming to light during the commission, especially Christopher Deering's testimony. I had seen that video on the internet numerous times. Lincoln, I'm sure you've seen it too. The snatch and grab, the protesters being thrown to the ground. This was an ex-veteran, military veteran, who had sustained severe injuries during one of his tours in Afghanistan, I believe. And he made it very well known. I'll just reiterate, he made it very well known to the police officers that were enclosing on the other veterans it was at the memorial, wasn't it?
It was.
And he told them, he let them know that he was an injured veteran. And so that if it came down to arrests, they weren't going to resist, and that they could do whatever was necessary, but just keeping in mind of his injuries. And they literally threw him to the ground, put a knee into his spine, and punched him repeatedly. And we have this, we saw it. This was evidence that the anti-Convoy lawyers tried to suppress and objected to, but Commissioner Rouleau was very impartial, and he did decide to have the evidence brought forth.
Yeah, that's right. Bathsheba and Brendan Miller were arguing for the presentation, for showing the evidence. Well, let's take a look at part of Chris's testimony. We just saw the tweet that was put up on the screen. Let's take a look at what he had to say exactly at the commission in regards to that incident.
I succumbed and I gave myself to the police. And as the police took me down, again, he knew he kneed me in my side, kicked me in my back. I was laying down. I was in the fetal position on my back. He kicked me in my ankle, my foot. As I was laying down, I had my hands completely up. I'm saying I'm very peaceful. I'm peaceful. I'm not resisting. I was then punched 4 or 5 times in my head. I had a knee on my back to keep myself down. I was on the ground for 1.5 to 2 minutes. My hands were zip tied. The officers slowly picked me up, and then we slowly proceeded to the processing line. We get to the processing line. The day was -20. I had no gloves on. At the beginning of the processing line, we were standing there, and I had asked, the duration of the processing line was 1.5 to 2 hours. So I was standing there in the cold for 2 hours. I asked the policeman who was on both sides of me, I said, do you mind, you know my conditions, is it okay if I sit or kneel because I'm in chronic pain? It was obvious, my face was flush, and I had cried multiple times, and I don't cry ever. It was the worst pain I had felt since I'd been blown up. The fact that I couldn't sit or stand was to me cruel and unusual punishment. We would go 15, 20 minutes without even moving. I also asked if I could have my medication, in which I had my prescription and my medication on my person, so that if I needed it, I could ask. I asked, and I was denied my medication to comfort my duress.
We're able to see veterans in our country being treated that way. Lincoln, you were on the ground in Ottawa. Did you see more incidents like that? What was the general vibe in Ottawa?
Yeah, well, these are the type of incidences that aren't really spoken about. Now they're coming to light a bit more with the commission. But even so, it's so hard to break that barrier where the general public can understand what actually took place over the course of those 2 days where the police moved in. There was just no excuse for the way that the police were behaving and the amount of force that the police used. You know, when they were attempting to get truckers out of their trucks, you know, they were using some sort of baton to just smash open the windows. You know, not knocking on the doors, asking them to go, just smashing the windows open, unlocking the door from the inside and dragging them out. So, you know, the police, yeah, they wanted to clear out the protest. They wanted to ultimately end it. But there's just no excuse for the way that they went about it and the amount of force that they used. It was just brutal. And again, it's just tough because even though a lot of things are coming to light with the commission, a lot of things are being spoken about, the sad reality is that a lot of people still don't understand what truly happened in Ottawa. The mainstream media has such a control over people and the information that they're putting out that even with the commission going on, yeah, more information is getting out, but there's still so many people that don't truly understand how bad it was.
No, of course, 100%. And, you know, the commission is there to talk about whether or not the Emergencies Act was necessary, not anything about the convoy. So I don't expect to see much more evidence to really show what it was on the ground. But I think that our independent coverage, if people go to convoyreports.com and look at all of your coverage during the convoy, all of our Rebel News reporters' coverage during the convoy, they'll be able to understand. But what we just heard Chris Deering say, like, I think it's even more impactful today on November 11th. During the ceremony, I mean, veterans were beaten up by their own police force in Ottawa. This veteran who served in the Canadian military
on the war memorial
was kicked.
Like, that's so disrespectful.
Was punched, was thrown snow at. And today we saw thousands of people going to honor the veterans who served for our country. But just 8 months ago, we saw those same veterans beaten up by police officers. We saw them disgraced by our prime minister, saying that they are a fringe minority with unacceptable views, and our prime minister didn't even bother to show up. So, you know, as a veteran, Tom, how do you feel?
Well, the important thing for me was that I got to attend. His presence was really irrelevant to me as a Canadian. You know, and to think back to that day when Chris was arrested, all linked arms. All the veterans linked arms, and they communicated clearly to the police that they would not fight back and that they were veterans. And all of them were wearing their medals, and a lot of them had their regimental headdress on. So their berets with their regimental badges. And the police still busted through that line, right? And that's not the only video footage I've seen of police violently taking the veterans to the ground. And, you got to understand that in a lot of cases, if they're wearing a star, if you see veterans with a star as one of their medals, not like a circular thing, that's a campaign star. That's from Afghanistan. And so when you're seeing veterans, the average public or non-veteran won't know what the medals really mean. But at the end of the day, if you see a star, that's a campaign star from, combat or being in a theater of war. And so to see the police do what they did against those veterans that were linking arms, I just don't think it's excusable. I really don't, and I struggle with this the whole time, because here's the irony: many police officers are also part-time soldiers. I know several, I know dozens of police officers in the Niagara region that are also part-time soldiers. And so how do you reconcile one treatment of one profession over the other when you in some cases are both? Yeah. But there's no way to tell on that day who was who. I just know that police attacked unarmed veterans. That's all I know.
It's disgraceful to think of.
Especially in that place.
Yeah, it absolutely is. All right, moving on from this sad little portion. The inquiry has been going on for 4 weeks now. You've been sitting there every single day. I think some days you only come for half a day, you come for a quarter of a day. But you've been sitting there for the past 4 weeks, and I'll come to you after, Lincoln, as well. Tom, looking back at the inquiry, is there anything that you've heard in the evidence that surprised you, or that made you think, well, why did we act like this earlier? Or why did we actually do this? Is there anything surprising or shocking that you heard in the evidence?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think it's the general public that actually shocks me more than anything 4 weeks into this. And our special guest every day who makes an appearance out front of I think she took the week off too, the one with the wagon who calls me a terrorist every time I walk by. I haven't seen her all week, so she took the week off, right?
I need to get some money. I need to start working.
Yeah, maybe she went to her real job.
Yes, exactly. I think what's interesting is we still, after 4 weeks, we still see this divide between about 5 different legal teams that talk about the inquiry. They talk about the Emergency Act, the purpose that we're all here. And the other 15 groups, they talk about covering their butts. It literally, you could just see them passing a hot potato from one to another. And that's really, that theme has still continued. And we've got a very exciting week coming up, I think. This is when we're going to hear from the intelligence community, as well as hopefully soon to say former commissioner of the RCMP, when she finds her moral compass and her courage and decides to do the right thing and step down. But we're going to have an exciting week coming up. But for the most part, I still think after 4 weeks, 2 big things. And I think this is really important. I have absolute confidence in Justice Rouleau, or the Commissioner Rouleau. I think personally he is seeking the truth, and that you can tell that when he asks the questions. And I'm really impressed by the Commission Council as well. They are also, ferociously seeking the truth, and you can tell that in their questioning. The government lawyers, Justin Trudeau's lawyers, they're all over the place. They're really all over the place, and I think they're constantly grasping at straws. Our team, as usual, is doing phenomenally well, and I say that with full disclosure of my bias, but it's a pleasure to watch. And every time Brendan gets up there, the whole the chat group lights up. It's Miller time, right?
It's Miller time.
So he goes up, and it's just it's the best part of the day, to be honest, when he goes up and he shreds people.
Oh, it is great.
And he doesn't do it maliciously. He does it very respectfully, very kindly,
very cordially,
very cordially. And it's just fun to watch.
No, it is. Well, I think, there's something that she said. there's 4 lawyers, apart from the commissioner, there are 4 lawyers in the room that are there to figure out whether or not the Emergencies Act was necessary. You've got Brendan Miller, you've got Eva Chipiuk, Keith Wilson, and Bathsheba Vandenberg.
That's
those
our
are the
team.
Yeah,
that's for our team.
And those are all the Freedom Corp lawyers.
Yes.
And in addition to that, to be fair, you've got Alan Honor from the TDF, and you've got some other ones from JCCF as well. But everyone else, Paul Cham, I think he's more focused on doing virtue signaling in the room and trying to make himself live by Ziggy Lee than to actually find out whether or not it was necessary. I think the OPS and Peter Slowly, the counsel for Peter Slowly, he's there for one reason, to make sure that Peter Slowly is actually treated fairly by the witnesses in the room. The other counsel, the OPS, he's there to prevent a lawsuit or to be ready for a lawsuit. So yeah, I think you're totally right in that sense. Lincoln, how long have you been watching? How closely have you been following the proceedings in Ottawa?
Well, I've been catching up with it. Just kind of, I've been watching a bit of your live streams. I've been away for a bit also, so it's been a little bit tough as I was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, covering a mayor's summit there. But I think just to add to Tom's point, Trudeau's lawyers are all over the place because it's become clear now after what we've seen so far in the inquiry that there's no evidence, no justification for invoking the Emergencies Act. As you guys have discussed quite a bit, there was not really any negotiations between organizers and the government. There was no real methods to try and de-escalate the situation. They basically just planned for the police enforcement that we saw on the last 2 days, and that was it. So I think the main takeaway from everything is just that it's become clear that there's no justification for invoking the Emergencies Act.
Yeah, and in terms of what you've been able to see, the same things that I asked for Tom. You were on the ground for close to a month, I believe, maybe even more than that. You were in Ottawa covering what was happening in front of Parliament. In terms of the evidence that was shown in the testimonies from witnesses like Ziggy Lee or Catherine McKenna, the failed Ottawa mayoral candidate, or Steve Bell, for that matter, chief of police, former interim chief of police for the Ottawa Police Services. Is there anything that shocked you from what you've heard?
Well, I think just the veteran that we just showed the clip of, hearing his testimony, I think that's all you need to see to show how out of line the police were. That's it. It's as simple as that. It's an unarmed, peaceful veteran who's handled that way. It's as simple as that.
I guess just to finish your round table, Celine, you've been following extremely closely for the past 2 weeks now. Anything surprising, anything that shocked you, that was really extraordinary that you've heard?
Yeah, just the fact that this is still going on, and despite this being so obviously, despite all the evidence suggesting that it was entirely unnecessary for the Emergencies Act to be invoked, I mean, that's the most surprising thing to me, is that no one has just said it point blank. And again, I'm still, if I could put my money on it, I'm just waiting for somebody, I don't know who, but for someone in their testimony to just sit down and be like, this is all a ruse. Like, this is what happened. We obviously didn't use all the tools in our toolbox. Like, you're the government. You're speaking on behalf of either municipal legislation, you got provincial, or you have federal. You have a lot of tools in your arsenal that you can use. We've been in discussion about this. We've heard the testimonies, and still we don't see anyone that's come forward and just been like, no, you're right. Actually, you're just right. We shouldn't have done this. And these are the people that are really at fault. Because it is like a hot potato. Exactly what you said. You see every single person, there are more incriminating things come to light, and yet they're of the same vein. So the hot potato just keeps on being thrown to the next person that's going to catch it. And in their attempts to try and, make the people involved in the convoy with the protest as their enemies, the focal point of the negativity, or who, they try to paint this again like it's some sort of misogynistic, dangerous movement. That's when you see Brendan Miller come in and just absolutely slay them. Like, just the narrative is like taken down effective immediately. and then they have the hot potato again, and you can see that struggle. He literally, when it's Miller time, you can just see, you know, the people start moving around, they start swallowing, breathing heavier, because they know that they can't, they just squirm, but they know that they're going to have to answer some tough questions.
I even think Justice Rouleau likes watching when Brendan comes up there too. And the other day I noticed when Brendan was up there, I was watching the other lawyers, and they were like, "Get the popcorn, get some popcorn." In fact, Bathsheba and I were in like doing my preparation for before I testified, and we were watching one of the other witnesses, and I made a big pot of popcorn.
That's right. You sent me a picture.
And turned the camera on. We took a picture of us watching it with the popcorn.
So good.
Yeah,
that's right. I saw that picture. That's true. All right, let's go to a quick ad break. When we come back shortly, we will speak about what is to come in the inquiry, what you can expect from the next 2 weeks, and then we'll part ways for the day. So stay tuned.
Freedom in 2022 is certainly about being able to make free choices for ourselves and for our family, who we believe are the best. We have seen so much suffering over the last 2 years. People who die alone in terrible conditions, people losing dream jobs, polarized families, and a society that insult and yell at each other for making a different medical choice. But people have risen, and it will be through them that the future will have an important meaning for all of you, but especially for the next generation. Rebel News has been present at every step of this great challenge, but so many other pioneers whom you could meet and hear at our great conference about freedom for our beautiful country, which is Canada. This conference, which will be held in Calgary and Toronto, will show you the faces of the influence of freedom that you have seen over the past 2 years. You don't want to miss this, so get your ticket now at rebelnewslive.com, and it will be a pleasure to see you there and meet you in large numbers. It's time to drop these masks and let the truth shine.
All right, CSIS. Let's talk CSIS for a second. CSIS, I've got a great interaction with CSIS recently. CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. That's what it is. CSIS, it's basically the anti-terrorism agency here in Canada. Mm-hmm. And well, Brandon Miller recently, in one of his cross-examinations, sneakily inserted a document by CSIS. And well, let's just take a look at the clip of Brandon Miller showing a CSIS document while he was cross-examining a witness. Take a look at that. Do we have the clip? All right. Well, can you just before?
So on that document there, on February 3rd, CSIS assessed there was no indicators that known IMVEs, and I take it you know what that is, actors were planning to engage in violence. And then if you scroll down to the other bullet points, it states on February 13th, CSIS advised that the implementation of the EA would likely galvanize the anti-government narrative within the convoy and further radicalize of some towards violence, referring to the increase in violent rhetoric following the declaration of the state of emergency in the province of Ontario. Furthermore, CSIS advised Thank you. Furthermore, CSIS advised that the invocation of the EA by the federal government would likely lead to the dispersing of the convoy within Ottawa, but would likely increase the number of Canadians who hold extreme anti-government views and push some towards the belief that violence is the only solution to what they perceived as a broken system and government. Following the invocation of the EA, CSIS briefed Cabinet and reiterated the potential for the EA to increase anti-government views and violent ideologies, including in those not yet radicalized. Now, can you agree with me that you would never want to do anything that could create further radicalization of extremists within the city of Windsor? Is that fair?
I'm going to object to this question on this document.
Withdrawn.
And object to this document being put to the mayor.
Withdrawn, I'm done.
Brandon goes like this, just like Ezra. You know something interesting is coming up. Like, can you vulgarize what we just saw?
Yeah, so essentially that document exactly explained that from CSIS, from Canadian intelligence, they literally put in their 2 cents, which is worth a lot because it's literally CSIS. They practically said, don't invoke the Emergencies Act, negotiate with them, because if you invoke it, it's going to essentially, in my own words, it's going to make them lose more trust in their government. It's going to put them in a position where those radicalized ideas would be, it's just, so don't invoke the Emergencies Act. Don't do that. Negotiate. Do other things. And they still didn't do that. And that was from CSIS. And then he withdrew it because he was being objected against. You don't see that right hook when it comes from him. You miss it. Totally miss it.
It's in the evidence now. So right now, when the commissioner reviews the inquiry, reviews the evidence, this is now on the record. This document, which is what is important. It brings us to next week. So next week we will see CSIS officials testify in front of the commission. What can we expect,
First, we should say what IMVE is, which is ideologically motivated violent extremism or extremists. So it's basically a really fancy acronym, probably for terrorism, right? And so this is the whole point. CSIS basically said, hey, if you do this, you run the risk of further galvanizing anti-government beliefs and rhetoric, and you're basically feeding into the hands of IMVE. There are other categories of it, and so next week when CSIS does come on to the stand, and I think there's a couple of witnesses from CSIS. I'm not entirely clear if the room is going to be cleared or not. I wouldn't be surprised if in some cases some of the CSIS people are not testifying in public.
Well, there is one. Commissioner Rouleau did provide a decision on a sort of blackout from the public and ex parte in-camera hearing for a few hours for some of the CSIS officials.
Right. So none of us will be in the room at that time. But there is... from my perspective, and I haven't really discussed this too much with the legal team. Sometimes I listen to some of the questions and I feel like the conditions are being put into place for this particular week coming up. Because this is when we're going to hear from all of the secret squirrels in the Canadian government, right? The spy agency as well as the RCMP. And the concern from me personally is that they get some sort of evidence into the courtroom that we can't really tear apart. But the public will not get a chance to examine that evidence themselves and make their own individual decisions at home and what they believe is to be the case. And, there's an enormous amount of evidence out there, so much to go through. But my concern is next week that we kind of get ambushed by something dirty, and I just don't get a great feeling about next week for us. And I don't mean to say that I have any inside idea that what there could be, because I know for a fact there is nothing.
Yes.
But it's the government.
But I don't think it'll be negative, though. I think we've seen some of the evidence shown by CSIS. We've seen some of the communication they had with the cabinet, with ministers, with MPs, with the city. We see what they were thinking of the convoy. CSIS is the anti-terrorism agency in Canada. It's basically what it is. And if there's one person that can tell you whether or not the convoy protesters were terrorists, that's CSIS. And I truly look forward to seeing their testimony next week. Lincoln, we just said CSIS can tell you whether or not the convoy people were terrorists, but you were on the ground. From what you've seen, would you consider the protesters that were there domestic terrorists?
No, I think it's obvious. No, like if anyone that was actually there walking around down Wellington Street, in and around those pockets of the city, it's obvious that that's not the case. One of the main examples I use to prove that that's not the case is the fact that there was, like food stations all across the downtown core, where they were serving food to anybody, not just the protesters, not just the people involved with the convoy, but to anybody in Ottawa. Whether you were a homeless person, a student, anybody could go there and get food. That's just one example. And another example is the way that the protesters were cleaning the streets of Ottawa, shoveling the snow. The streets must have been cleaner during the 3.5 weeks that the convoy was there than Ottawa on a regular day. So I think it's quite obvious that the protesters were peaceful. And I think it's interesting that CSIS knew that this was going to, basically open more people's eyes to the fact that there's overreach from the government with the Emergencies Act, and it's going to push more people to that side where they can see that the actions taken by the government are just not just. So, the Emergencies Act is horrible, and the way that they did it was horrible. But I guess it's tough to say, but if there's anything good that did come out of it, it's how many more people were awakened from them invoking that.
Yeah, well, I think it's great to have the insight of someone who was actually on the ground. We've been talking to Freedom Convoy. I don't even know how to call you, interns. We've been talking to Freedom Convoy interns.
That's what it says on my LinkedIn.
He's a volunteer.
Students, you are Convoy students. We get your perspective, but then we can also get the perspective of the actual protesters who are on the ground, who would speak with some of our reporters, including you, including other of our Rebel News journalists, daily, every single day. So yeah, thanks for joining us today, Lincoln. And if you guys want to see some of Lincoln's coverage during the convoy, you can head on to convoyreports.com, and there you'll see a bunch of videos from Lincoln, Alexa, David Menzies, and a lot of other people. All right, thanks for coming on, Lincoln. Stay tuned. We'll go to a quick ad break, and when we come back, we'll discuss further the Emergencies Act inquiry.
Freedom in 2022 is your right to disagree with me anytime on anything, in your heart, online, or in the public square. Freedom in 2022 is also your right to live your life however you see fit without hurting me or, for that matter, being bothered by me. But freedom in 2022 is in very real danger under constant attack by Justin Trudeau through his censorship bills, his attacks on gun rights, his attacks on farmers, and his attacks on peaceful protesters. These people have even tried to denormalize our flag. At Rebel News, we're not afraid to have dangerous discussions that Justin Trudeau, the media, and big tech censors say we're not allowed to have. And we want to have them with you at our upcoming Rebel Live events, first in Toronto, November 19th, and again in Calgary, Saturday, November 26th. I'll be there with dozens of other Rebels and Rebel-adjacent free thinkers, and I hope that you'll join us. Just go to rebelnewslive.com to get your tickets today, but do not sleep on this, because these tickets are going fast. See you soon.
Welcome back. We are joined by a Rebel News reporter from Quebec, Alexa Lavoie. Alexa, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, and you?
Good. So now we just spoke a little bit about the evidence that we're going to see next. Well, not the evidence, the people that are going to be testifying next week.
That's
CSIS,
right. Yeah.
the great CSIS officials that are going to be taking the stand next week. And we spoke about, the protesters on the ground and everything. But the week right after that, the Liberal cabinet is testifying. Bill Blair, Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, Omar, the transport minister, Al Jabra.
That was hard for you.
Yeah, David Lametti, Marco Mendicino, and some others as well. That's what we're going to see in the last week of the inquiry. We'll see testimonies from the cabinet ministers. What do you expect to see coming from them?
Well, I'd like to say that I expect a little bit of organized chaos where, Brendan Miller goes up there and, cuts down the narrative a little bit, which I suspect will be the case, but also just to see a lot more of the same. I mean, this narrative that we're seeing, I suggest it's coming from somewhere. And since it was the federal government that did invoke the Emergencies Act, and he had the support of the people around him from what we've been able to gather. So I think that it's pretty clear that we're going to see the same narrative. They're going to use the same words, and they're going to try and paint the same picture. What about you, Alexa? What do you think?
But the fact that they are at the last week of all this commission give them an advance because they see all the point of view coming from everybody, so they can be more prepared and more trained to do their testimony. This is the part that I'm a little bit afraid, since like everybody have passed before them. So I think that give them like an advance on everybody. But I'm pretty sure they would try to say that protesters and organizers were mostly lying, that what they did was necessary. And I just expect what we heard so far from the Prime Minister during the convoy, the same narrative and the same line of thinking. And he would probably use the same tool that he did use. And for coming on what like Lincoln was saying, he was talking about the fact that, I actually forget about it, but we come back to that. But it was really important because he mentioned something, and I wanted to come back on it because I think it's really important. But anyway, I will. That will come back to me.
Yeah, well, just to come back on the point that they're testifying less. That's right. I don't think we'll have too much of an impact, though, because we already saw a lot of revealing testimonies. The lawyers were the lawyers prepared witnesses such as Tamir Alish extremely well. Their testimonies was very revealing. Yes, Justin Trudeau maybe did have time to see what was happening before him, but I don't think it's going to be unfair, especially looking at how Commissioner Rouleau is conducting the commission. He's extremely impartial. He's extremely neutral. He's able, as I said before, you've got Paul Champ on one side and Brendan Miller on the other side, and he's able to be neutral to both of them and treat them the exact same way. So yeah, I think we're going to see a good outcome come out of this commission. I know we're repeating ourselves every single day, but it's true. I think we're going to see a good outcome.
Yeah. And I think that you can't stop the truth either. Like, that's a really big part of all of this. We understand what it was like to see firsthand the accounts of the people that were there, a part of the convoy. We saw exactly how the police were treating these protesters, these Canadian patriots, these people that were coming together for a common goal, a common ideology. Despite their differences, it was literally the largest gathering that I have seen and will probably see in my lifetime of people that all came for the same reason. It was people of different ethnicities, backgrounds, identities, etc. Everyone was able to put their differences aside, if they did have them, to come together for this common goal. So you can't stop the truth from coming out. I don't believe that. I think that's why inevitably, no matter how much they try to suppress the evidence or object to it, you literally just cannot break down or throw a veil over, so to speak, a truth that is so prominent, such as what we saw in Ottawa.
Yeah, and I just retrieved, like Lincoln mentioned, that one of the best thing that this event did, it's opening the eyes of other people that saw the overreach of the government. But also I wanted to add that this event and all the government did react and treat the unvax or these people who were protesting did create a big polarization, more deep that we saw before. We had like really the people who wanted the freedom, and we saw the people who were really on the other side, who actually paint that those protesters as like criminal and white nationalists and racists, and they never been on the ground with us, like they never see all what's happening with their own eyes. They just follow the media, and we saw it in the commission that I think it's Peter Slotty who mentioned the misinformation and disinformation that was coming from the media. But this is for everything. This information was like so huge. So the people who were looking at the media had a complete other narrative than what we were seeing on the ground.
Yeah, not only did Peter Slowly mention misinformation by the media, but Jim Watson, former mayor of Ottawa, said he relied on mainstream media to look at, the incidents that happened with people, to look at the violence coming from the protester, when he said that, the convoy created people that had their masks snatched away from their face by
Absolutely not.
convoy
No.
protesters.
No.
And then Brendan Miller, I believe it was Brendan Miller who pressed him on that, said, "Well, did you see any of that yourself?"
Yes.
And he said, "I saw it in the media." It's all the media, everything they see in terms of violence that arose from the convoy. They gather that information from mainstream media. No, I think it's very revealing, and Justice Trudeau must be seeing that right now. Just to move on from this a little bit, I don't know how much time we have left for this live stream, but I want to talk a little bit about Justin Trudeau and their behavior. I don't have the list of clip in front of me right now, so if you can just take a look at one clip that involves Justin Trudeau from this past that we've seen in the past, that would be great. Just take a look at that. I don't know if we have any clip by Justin Trudeau. I don't have a list of clip in front of me.
New testimony about what happened over the course of the invocation of the Emergencies Act and the illegal blockades that were seizing Ottawa and indeed places right across the country. We called this inquiry so that Canadians could see exactly why it was needed to invoke the Emergencies Act, and how, when we invoked it in a way that was responsible, limited, and targeted on solving the problem as quickly as possible. We thank the Commission for its ongoing work. We thank everyone who's participating. I asked from the very beginning to be allowed to appear to share our perspective on this. This was an important and difficult moment in Canada's history, and it's important that the right lessons be drawn.
How absolutely insane is that? Like, to have someone in a high position, such as the literal Prime Minister of Canada, lie through their teeth, saying that they have this commission going on because the rest of Canada needs to see exactly why it was needed, why it was necessary for the Emergencies Act to be invoked. And then you have every single person that has testified, that's from the OPS, OPP. We had Windsor Police, we had different city officials, provincially, federally. No one has said or agreed. No one has agreed. I'll be more specific. No one has agreed with Trudeau that invoking the Emergencies Act was necessary. There have been times where they said it was helpful, but not necessary. Again, to break it down, all of the border blockades were dissolved before the Emergencies Act was invoked. The only thing that went on continuously was Ottawa, and you got to see that firsthand. You stayed with Lincoln the longest, I think, out of anyone, and a couple other people that went there to go and help film and just be support to rotate. I know you guys were live streaming late at night, so you got to see everything. From the peacefulness, the little middle ground, and then to where the police cracked down, and you were shot. You were shot in the leg with a canister of tear gas. Isn't that right?
Yes. And just what do you want to expect from Justin Trudeau? He lied from the beginning. Like same before, like protesters arrived in Ottawa. They're calling them fringe minority who stole food from the homeless, who are like racist, misogynist, and so on. Like, I call by all name people. And what I saw so far, it was just peaceful people. And you know what? It's what I observed for the first time of my life. People coming from different walk of life and be able to cooperate and not judge nobody and let their different on the side to work all together for one goal, is getting back their freedom. And this is something that's bothered me, because we talk about thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people gathering at the same place. These people represent the society. In society, we have bad people and we have good people. We have people who do like bad stuff. But why? Because one person did one action. The thousands other one are the same. Since when we do that? Like, it's example, like in the politics. Because one person in politics, in the group, did something wrong. We just expose that person and say that does not represent our party. But it's the same thing that what was happening. And in the video, I was really finding funny because you had like all these bubble heads doing that around like Trudeau. I was just like, this is hilarious, you know, because Chrystia Freeland, she's always there like, yeah. But in the same time, like, he's lying. He's lying since the beginning, and he's supposed to represent all Canadians. Whatever your vax, unvax, or your different, you have different view, you should accept them.
Yeah.
Like, same if they don't believe what you say or they are disagreeing with what you try to do, you represent all of them. Like, same if they didn't vote for you, you represent them. So
No, I know.
the way he was talking about, first of all, he was putting all the protesters as unvax and terrible person, when we know that there were vax and unvax.
It was mixed.
And different,
Yeah,
like,
it was mixed.
yeah.
Exactly.
And so he just painted them as terrible person, and it was troubling to see that coming from the mouth of the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah, and there's one person we saw in the video. It's Defense Minister Anita Anand. I forgot to mention her. She's going to be testifying as well. The Defense Minister, Liberal Party Defense Minister for the country of Canada. So we'll see her testimony as well. But no, I fully agree with you, Alexa. And Justin Trudeau continues to try to defend his decision to invoke the Emergencies Act despite everything that we're seeing. Another thing too is that Justin Trudeau wasn't the one to call the inquiry. The inquiry is built in the Emergencies Act.
It's built within
make sure
exactly.
that there's no authoritarian leader that uses it unjustifiably when it's not necessary, when you shouldn't use it. So it's not Justin Trudeau who called the inquiry.
Yeah, trying to make himself sound like some hero.
Yeah, it
like,
is.
Oh,
built
let's
into
respond
the
to this. Like, get out of here. Come on.
It's a fail-safe built in the law to prevent authoritarian leaders from using it. So it'll be interesting to see that as well. And third thing too, I'm wondering if he's going to actually answer a question. You know, Justin Trudeau hasn't answered a single question in 7 years since he got elected. Imagine Brendan's
gonna go up. He's gonna be like, water bottles, paper bottles. I can't wait to see like the actual literal breakdown.
Yeah.
It's lots of fragile masculinity behind this
it'll
individual.
Be great. And
so
stay
I
tuned
can't
because
wait.
we will be in the room and we will be able to ask them questions as they come out. We'll be able to question them about their testimony about the Emergencies Act and everything else. So definitely stay tuned for that. All right. I don't know once again how much time we have left. If someone could let me know in my ear how much time we have left before we need to move away from this live stream. Sure. All right, so let's go to
I was just mentioning that it will be like delectable to see Justin Trudeau being asked for once real question, you know, like we saw Justin Trudeau that media doesn't ask what we want to hear, but for once it will not have the choice. But the thing is, like, Justin Trudeau is pretty good to not answer the question when it's actually tough question. He's actually turning around. So we see, like, if example like TDF or other lawyer will have actually enough time, because as you know, they are not the one who decide how much time they have for asking questions. But I hope they will have enough time to ask like question that we need to ask.
They will. Don't worry about that. The commission is extremely fair. They've been granted standing. Everything. I really don't have any doubt in that regard at all, especially since they have Brendan Miller and Bathsheba, who are also cross-examining. So they're all working together a little bit. All right. Thanks so much for coming in, Alexa. We will go to a quick ad break. And when we come back, we'll have our editor-in-chief, Shilligan Reid, join us for a quick segment. And then we will be done for the day. So stay tuned.
Freedom in 2022 is a great threat in Canada. We've got provincial governments that have stripped away fundamental human and civil liberties in Canada. And we've got a federal government that is censoring and controlling the media and even cracking down on the right to protest in ways that are unprecedented in the post-war era. It's a fascinating but terrifying time if you're concerned about freedom, concerned about your basic liberties right now. But we've got to do more than just complain about it. That's why I've accepted the invitation to speak at the Rebel Live conference in Calgary, November 26th, coming right up here. I'm going to be speaking in particular about the state of the media. It's controlled by the federal government and what independent media can do to hold power to account, to stand up for our basic freedoms. I'm going to be there. I hope you'll come. You can buy your tickets at rebelnewslive.com, and I hope to see you there.
All right, we're back with Sheila.
Olivia in studio. I don't know if there's a connection issue with Skype, but I cannot see the team in Ottawa. So if I call for a clip or anything like that, I can't see, and I can't see if they think I'm funny or if they think I'm ridiculous. So maybe we could fix that. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks. Because I'm 100% flying blind right now. Guys in Ottawa, let me just say, as sort of the head of all the journalists and sort of the coach of the journalists, I think I sort of am. You guys are doing a fantastic job. It can be taxing a little bit to have to sit through this testimony and hear what is happening to good people firsthand and relive their experiences with them. But I'm really proud of the work that you're doing and your attention to detail and your speaking truth to power on behalf of all the people across the country who are wondering why the mainstream media journalists are not doing their jobs.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you.
No, what I think it's the important thing about us being here, I think, is having an alternative view of the convoy and an alternative view of the situation. We see all the mainstream media reporters looking at it from one specific angle, which is the convoy was bad. You know, Justin Trudeau good, Emergencies Act good, convoy bad. They're all looking at it that way. The convoy terrorized people of Ottawa. They terrorized citizens by providing food, by having bouncy castle, by having trucks on the street.
Yeah. Well, there's no variation to their narrative, and we know that. You can see it very clearly, pardon me, when we're in the room with them, in the media room, that is, here live at the commission. The points that they really make, I'll be the one to say it. That's fine. But I was able to observe them actually laugh when certain people were called to the stand and became very emotional while giving their testimony about the personal experiences that they had. Yeah, exactly. And so, I just kind of headphones on, turn that volume up a little bit. Sometimes I would leave the room because it is very, very disturbing to see stuff like that happen, where you have a news agency, so-called, we'll say, where they're supposed to actually be able to provide people with the truth and be able to broadcast the honest narrative. And you can see that it's very distorted when it comes from them. And it's clear within their actions behind that room and behind closed doors as well.
Yeah, that's why I'm so glad you guys are there, because that's the sort of thing that the public would never know about. You would never know that you're dealing with a mainstream media who thinks honking is terrorism, but throwing a peaceful protester in jail for 49 days is just the cost of doing business to bring back the boring order to the streets of Ottawa. You guys, I think we're going to call for a quick ad, though, and see if I can reconnect, because I have no idea what's going on.
Instead of calling for an ad, since the beginning we've been talking about helpful but not necessary. The phrase "helpful but not necessary," which is what we've been hearing many witnesses say. But there's one clip number 10. If we could throw to that, let's take a look at that. It's Patricia Ferguson, OPS acting deputy chief Patricia Ferguson, stating under oath that the Emergencies Act was helpful but not necessary. Let's take a look at what she said.
As I understand your testimony earlier, there were only two ways in which the invocation of the Emergencies Act was of use to police in ending the freedom movement protests. One, it bypassed the requirement to swear in officers from other jurisdictions, which saved a bit of time. And two, it helped to procure the services of heavy rig tow truck operators. Is that a fair characterization of your testimony?
Of my testimony, yes. I do believe, though, the seizing of assets was also helpful.
Can you expand on that?
So the threat of seizing assets of bank accounts and rigs and things like that.
Okay. Useful, but not necessary.
Yeah, useful, but not necessary.
Oh, hey guys, have you checked out our Rebel News store lately? You really should, because we're always adding fun things into the store. As the news changes, I guess so does the merchandise. We've got something for everybody. We've got a great selection of pro trucker merchandise, like this excellent honk honk shirt right here that will surely drive all your liberal friends and relatives absolutely crazy, although I don't think the trip is all that far. But right now in the store, this is my very favorite t-shirt, and I know t-shirts. Free Tamara in support of Convoy leader Tamara Lich, as she is treated like a common terrorist by Justin Trudeau's government for her role in the peaceful weeks-long street party against COVID mandates in Ottawa. I've got great news though, if you can't decide which shirt is your favorite, because right now at rebelnewsstore.com, you can use the coupon code FALL, F-A-L-L, and buy 2 t-shirts and get 25% off. And as always, shipping is free. So head on over to rebelnewsstore.com, pick your 2 favorite t-shirts, and save 25%. Thanks, and remember, free Tamara.
Freedom in the year 2022, for me, folks, it means the return of Rebel Live. Now, Rebel Live is an annual event we used to put on before the man, or was it the COVID Karen, made us shut it down during the pandemic years. It is a freedom fun fest, if you will. All the freedom fighters you've grown to know and love over the years, they're going to be speaking at the Toronto and Calgary events. The Toronto event is on November 19th. That's a Saturday, and it will feature the likes of Dr. Julie Ponesse, Archer Pawlowski, Tamara Lich, and all your
All right, we're back
Need a new
now.
headshot in the worst way.
I think we all need one.
Guys, yeah, I'm gonna call for a couple of clips here, guys. I put it in the Skype chat or the Slack chat, Olivia, just so you're not caught flat-footed. But were we able to find, and I know it's out there pretty easily to grab, Justin Trudeau calling people names, saying that they're racist, sexist, misogynist. I just want to show what he called people, and then let's talk about the impact that actually had on people when he was calling them those names, because he's a buffoon, and we all know that, and I don't take him seriously, but the mainstream media sure does. And so they repeat verbatim without skepticism, because they have lost all journalistic curiosity, the things that he said about the people in the convoy without ever actually talking to the people in the convoy. Like, your prime minister can just call you racist, and your media then will repeat it, and then all of a sudden you're racist forever, and you get people who are like, I'm Sikh, or I'm black, or I'm indigenous. Like, it's so obvious. But that's the state of the mainstream media here in Canada.
Well, you get a Métis grandmother called a white supremacist. That's what you get when that's what happens.
I think Olivia's having difficulty finding that clip. I should have called for it a little bit earlier, put it in the Slack chat earlier. But anyway, let's go to clip 14. And if I scroll back, I can give you a quick description of what clip 14 is. So clip 14 is Tamara Lich, upon hearing that her prime minister had decided that she was a sexist, racist, domestic terrorist. You can hear the emotional impact that this had on her. And quite frankly, it radicalizes people against the government when you're like, no, I simply just think we should be allowed to have as many people in our house for Christmas as we want, and that doesn't make me a sexist. That turns people away from the prime minister, and hopefully he'll find out the hard way at the ballot box the next time around. But let's go to clip 14, please.
I was becoming increasingly alarmed listening to my prime minister call me a racist and say that I shouldn't be tolerated. I found his rhetoric to be incredibly divisive, and I'm a believer that if you're a leader of a country, you have to lead all of your people, even if you don't agree with them. And I just saw so much Coming across Canada every day, I heard stories. People, at least 3 people, would tell me they were planning their suicides until we started the convoy. Or stories of people that we were too late. I heard from families that were living in their vehicles because they'd lost their jobs. I heard from people that had lost their jobs and lost everything. I have the tears of thousands of Canadians on my shoulder who every day told me that we were bringing them hope. I saw little old ladies praying on their knees on the side of the road, and I saw little children holding signs saying, "Thank you for giving me back my future."
Just makes me so angry, because imagine you've lost everything, you're living in your car, you're contemplating suicide, and then your prime minister calls you a racist on top of it. Never having met you, not knowing you. He is the prime minister, as Tamara rightly points out, of all of Canada, not just of the Liberal voters. And he is clearly the most divisive politician since his father, who quickly turned the West against him as though we were ever for him. But the remaining ones that were, he quickly decided that he didn't want anything to do with the West. And here we are again. This Métis grandma from the West decided we've got to do something. We just can't do nothing. And for her troubles, she gets labeled as literally one of the worst things on the planet. You know, being called a racist means that you are denying the inherent humanity of the person beside you. Like, I'm not sure what Tamara's religion is. We never had that discussion, but I think she's a believer. And when you judge people on the color of their skin beyond their character, you're denying the fact that they are an image bearer of the divine. And I know that that's not Tamara. I know that it's not. Yeah. But simply because she stood up to the prime minister, her prime minister labeled her all of those things. And it's just absolutely despicable. Shame on him. But he's an idiot. So shame on all the journalists who repeated it without any sort of skepticism whatsoever. They are responsible for Tamara's tears as well.
I mean, I think that you just covered everything that we had to say about that, on that. I think that you're right. And we do have the clip of Justin Trudeau calling the truckers and the People Party Freedom Convoy, and what he says that are anti-vaxxers, misogynist, racist, far-right extremists. Let's take a look at exactly what Trudeau said.
Sure. Yep.
On sent que la sécurité est accrue autour de vous, là. On sent que c'est plus dangereux peut-être en ce moment pour vous?
On est dans un moment difficile parce qu'on est en train de prendre des choix importants. On est en train de décider que oui, on va s'en sortir de cette pandémie par la vaccination. Puis on en connaît tous des gens qui sont en train d'hésiter un petit peu. On va continuer d'essayer de les convaincre. Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Qui sont extrémistes.
Qui ne croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. C'est un petit groupe, mais qui prend de la place. Et là, il faut faire un choix en tant que leader, en tant que pays. Est-ce qu'on tolère ces gens-là ou est-ce qu'on dit, ben voyons, la plupart des gens, presque 80% des Québécois ont fait ce qu'il fallait faire, se sont fait vacciner, on veut revenir aux choses qu'on aime faire. C'est pas ces gens-là qui vont nous bloquer. Maintenant, on est dans une 4e vague qui est presque entièrement des gens non vaccinés qui remplissent nos hôpitaux à travers le pays. À un moment donné, il faut mettre son pied à terre pour dire, excusez-moi, là, mais il n'y a pas de débat sur la science.
No, but there is a debate in science. Like that's science. Like that's literally science. The part that really bothers me here, beyond the fact that he's calling people names that he refuses to even talk to, he doesn't even care what's in their minds or on their hearts or what compels a person to leave behind everything and go all the way across the country at their own expense because they don't know what else to do. It's when he says they're taking up space. What does that even mean? That they shouldn't even exist? Like, when you take up space, it's the fact that you are alive, that you're existing, that you are composed of matter in the universe. There's a little bit of science for you, Justin Trudeau. But he doesn't even want them to exist as atomic matter. Like, what the hell is that? That's revolting. If he said that about anybody else, they'd be calling him genocidal. But since he said it about people who are resistant to forced vaccination, not anti-vaxxers, but people who simply believe in choice, it's just fine and dandy. Because 80% of the people went along to get along. Well, it doesn't matter. Those 20% of people have a right to exist. You just don't get to disappear them from society and then claim tolerance.
I agree. It's just ridiculous to hear that. Hear such a hateful speech. It's such a hateful speech, and then being broadcasted on television, widely accepted as an acceptable thing to say. You know, saying as you just mentioned once again, that they take up space. How can anyone say that and be seen as someone that's super nice, that's super tolerant? You take up space, and there's the other thing too. There's no debate on vaccination. The scientific method is literally to question everything. If someone says something, if someone says the sky is blue, why is it? Yeah, why is it blue?
Like test your theory.
Well, that's, yeah, exactly. You know, it's a Socratic method. I love the Socratic method. Just asking why 50 times. But it's true, you should debate. There's no reason why you shouldn't be debating anything.
Well, I just think that it's specifically really disgusting to have the prime minister of any country actually label their citizens as misogynist, racist, etc., all of those terrible things that he said. Because at the end of the day, labels can be very, very dangerous. And it's not about even, they're affected by these labels, obviously. If you're being called a misogynist or a racist and you inherently do not hold any of those values, but it is just like we were talking about mainstream media and other actual radicalists that hear those things. And then it's the way that they will treat those people that becomes very, very dangerous. That's when you have the police that even if it's an order and they're just following orders, they won't blink twice to throw down veterans because their prime minister has labeled them as misogynist, racist, domestic terrorists. Yeah. So all in the name of doing their duty and upholding what they believe is right is all channeled and funneled from a narrative that comes from who is supposed to be representing the entirety of Canada. Justin Trudeau, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you.
Who's that horrible journalist there who just sat there and was like, yep.
It seems legit.
And she interjected. She was the one who said extremists. And she opened the door and he just like kicked it down like the Kool-Aid man and walked right through it and started throwing around all sorts of names on everybody. Who is she that is so horrible that she didn't say, like, hang on for a second here. There are 6 million Canadians who you said couldn't get on an airplane because they were unvaccinated, dirty people. Do you think that 6 million Canadians that you're the prime minister of a country that has such a racist, sexist, extremist problem that there are 6 million of them? Is there something wrong with you, maybe, that you got elected by those people? She didn't even think about that. Speaking of which, that should move us on to a clip that I wanted to throw to you about the mayor of Coutts, Alberta, who said something similar. Let's go to clip 15. Because Keith Wilson, lawyer for the Convoy, he was questioned about the so-called hate speech coming from the Convoy, which, by the way, there are no hate crimes charges against anybody within the Convoy. I want to point that out. Everybody keeps talking about how they're hateful and there was hate-oriented criminality or whatever the OPS said when they make up these new policing terms that aren't real. He was asked about that and he said, it's not these guys doing all the hate talking. It's the prime minister. So maybe we can go to clip 15.
You agree hate speech has been codified in the criminal code, right?
Yes, and I find the prime minister's hate speech towards unvaccinated people and saying how do we deal with these people deeply troubling.
Right. So you don't agree then that threats against the life of somebody is not a protected form of speech under the Charter?
I do not believe that anyone, either morally or legally, should be threatening anyone else's life, and I have received many death threats myself since representing the Freedom Convoy.
His responses are just great. Keith, it shows that he's a lawyer, you know. The way that he just turned around the question when he was asked about hate speech was just a great response, great testimony overall from Keith.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I totally agree with you. We know Keith. We've talked to him, obviously. We've conducted some interviews. I've spoken with him personally as well. And it's very clear because it's a very unique instance for people that are not aware. But Keith was also in Ottawa at the time of the convoy. So he was there at the same time. And that's how he was introduced to Tamara Lich, I believe, as well. So all of those things came together in conjunction at once. And now he's here providing a testimony, as well as being here to defend the people that he worked and knew personally on a personal basis every single day. So what he says in regards to hate speech and how the Prime Minister is literally just dead naming people, and it's horrible.
Yeah, and just touch on that. He's testifying, and he's also a lawyer. And there's a quick thing that I'm gonna talk about, and I don't think a lot of people know about this. It's very interesting. So there's a reason why Keith was able to testify while still being a lawyer. So the way that the convoy lawyers organize themselves following the British method. So they had a solicitor and they had a barrister. In Britain, that's what they usually do. The barrister is going to be the one going on the stand, cross-examining the witnesses, asking questions, talking to the judge. And the solicitor is going to be the one doing the background work, doing the paperwork. And Keith knew that there was a chance that he would be testifying. So he made sure that him and Eva would stay back and do the work from behind and be in contact with Brendan and Bath Sheba Vandenberg. And Bath and Brendan would be the ones testifying. It's a very interesting thing when you think about it.
Yeah, Keith is a longtime freedom-oriented lawyer from the West. So when he went to Ottawa, it was no surprise for me to see him there. And then, trying to see, him being on the ground, outside, on the street, with the protesters. No better lawyer to do it, I don't think. And, an eyewitness account. He's got something the mainstream media journalists don't have, and that's the fact that he was a witness to the things that went down in the convoy when the mainstream media journalists were like, ooh, no, icky. Blue-collar people are in our city. We're just going to sit in our cubicles all day, nice and toasty and warm, while the most interesting story in the entire world was unfolding on the streets right in front of them. Think about how terrible of a journalist you have to be when the most compelling, interesting, largest human rights demonstration in the entire country, in the history of the country, is unfolding on the street right outside of your office, and you're like, gross, no, thanks, no.
That's right.
What's
The CBC
what's the
Ottawa.
Prime Minister doing?
Yeah, the CBC Ottawa office is located on Spark Street, right next to Parliament. We keep walking past it every single day. It's very funny to walk past it, but in regards, their office is literally on the street right next to Parliament. There's Parliament, Wellington, Sparks. So if they wanted to get some eyewitness accounts from the convoy, all they had to do was get up from their little cubicles, walk outside, open the door, take their camera, and look at what was actually happening. They were right there.
Well, interestingly enough, what I was able to observe while I was there in Ottawa in the beginning too, is the only time that I really saw them there and with their cameras was from behind police barricades. That narrative, the way that you choose to paint a picture is very, very important. So they're live streaming from behind a police blockade that was just put up there because there was so many people around Parliament. So of course, just to be able to put a little bit of separation and to create a path for people to go into. But it looks like there's actual crazy stuff happening, because the first thing you see is a barricade, and then you see a bunch of police officers and police cars, and then you just see people all over the place. There's no context. It's just what they're saying. We were in the crowds. We were talking to people. They couldn't do that. They wouldn't. And the times that they were in the crowd, they were masked up and terrified of the people around them. And of course, no one's going to give them an interview because they knew exactly how they would be portrayed.
Oh, you remember at the UCP AGM, Celine, you and me, I'm like, oh, mainstream media journalists, mainstream media. There's one right there. Why? I don't know who they are. I don't care who they are, but they're all wearing masks.
Tables of masked people. Yeah, totally.
You could tell. I'm like, oh, there's the post media Toronto, the Toronto Star aisle, and then there was the like 4 cool kids, conservative journalists that were just like living free and having fun. Like you could see there was like a division. It was completely like that. And it's like that everywhere you go with these people. Like they stand, they take pictures of the crowd, like they're taking pictures of wildlife, but dare they go actually talk to them or like see that they're normal? Because I think if you actually talk to them, it would undo your preconceived notions about them, right? And so you don't want that. You want them to be the extremists. You don't want to go talk to them and find out that they're married to a black man or whatever, you know, like you want them to be the like scary racist person in your head. And if you go talk to them, you're going to find out otherwise. So why would you do that? Why would you go looking for the truth?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really funny, again, just to point out about like mainstream media is just like the masks, like their narrative that they created about protesters ripping masks off of the other people in Ottawa. Listen, there was like no one with a mask on around those crowds, no one at all. And the few times that I saw them on police officers or mainstream media people, there was nobody reaching out over police barricades. Can you imagine ripping anything off of a police officer and getting away with it?
I'm reliably informed that that's assault and battery. And so if that did happen, that's a charge, right? Like you don't have to like invoke the Emergencies Act because even if it were happening, and I don't believe it was, because that's insane. Nobody's doing that. When you see somebody wearing a mask still, I'm like, sad. Very sad for them. But if that were happening, you don't need the Emergencies Act. You just need to go charge them with assault. That's assault. When you yank, it's like if I walked up to Celine and yanked her hair, you go tell a cop, the cop charges me with assault. Done. You don't need a wartime law for that. The dumbest thing that I've ever heard. When I heard that, I was like, okay, that definitely didn't happen. But even if it did, that's assault. That's not war measures.
Yeah, well, again, it is the same people that are classifying the bouncy castles also as being inherently dangerous and life-threatening. So makes sense a little bit to me.
What a boring town. William, you live there. Is that town as boring as I think it is?
Yeah. You know, everyone keeps talking badly about Ottawa. I've been trying to convince people to move to Ottawa. Here's my pitch for people. It's a gorgeous city. It's beautiful. But
so
it's
is Edmonton,
corrupt.
but I don't like it.
But it's corrupt. I like the look of the town. The Parliament Hill is just fantastic to watch. Rideau Canal is great to go run there. But it's corrupt. It's corrupt to its core. It's a political town. It's government people that are there. So that ruins it a little bit. I like it.
Come to Alberta.
I don't mind. Yeah, I want to
taste the freedom on the wind.
I want to move to the great province of Alberta once. Yeah.
Yes. Speaking of politicians that completely libel protesters. Thank you. Speaking of terrible politicians and bureaucrats, let's go to, I think it is the clip. It's one of the last ones in what did I write down? Is it clip 13? The mayor of Coutts, Alberta, where simultaneously as the convoy was going on, for those of you who don't know, some truckers and farmers and locals and thousands of their friends were engaged in a sometime blockade of the main border crossing between Alberta and Montana. Coutts, Alberta, and Sweetgrass, Montana, they really operate as one town because there's really not enough people on the side to facilitate all the services they need. But farmers were doing that. Truckers were doing that. Locals were doing that. People were coming from all around to support them. Some of the most beautiful imagery of just the people on horseback holding the Alberta flag coming in to help. Bitterly cold. We have a documentary if anybody would like to see about our journalist time there. It's at truckerdocumentary.com. So you can take a look at that there. But the mayor of Coutts had some unkind things to say about the people who were blocking the border. And I think this is kind of ridiculous because he's the mayor of a village where I think it's fewer than 300 people live there.
250 people.
Yeah. 250. Yeah. So half the size of Mirror, Alberta, which I think is like 500 people on a good day. 1,500 if they're having a protest. But he had some unkind things to say about his own residents. And again, I'll draw some comparisons to him and Justin Trudeau shortly after if we want to roll that clip.
Why did you describe the protesters as domestic terrorists?
When I look for the definition of a domestic terrorist, these people seem to fit that bill, and yet no one ever labeled them that.
You felt they were terrorizing people by their behavior.
Because they were causing harm to the country.
Do you still have the same view that the truckers were domestic terrorists?
I think whoever okayed blocking the highway was possibly.
Well,
he answered like a
That
liberal, though.
That guy is not a very bright man. I think in his testimony, he said, just in his own anecdotal evidence, although I think it would really be quite easy to poll a town of 250. You could just go knock doors one afternoon. But he said roughly 70% of the people in his town supported what the truckers were doing.
That's right, yeah.
Which means that he is the mayor of a town that supports domestic terrorism. And if he were a more reasonable man, look, if I were the mayor of a town that was all of a sudden supporting homegrown Al-Qaeda, which is domestic terrorism, like if you're actually going to use that word, let's talk about it. If you were the mayor of Omar Cotterville, I would be like, I don't want to be the mayor here. I don't want anything to do with these terrorists. But him, yeah, he's happy. He's going to be the mayor of the village. It's fine. I hope they punish him handily at the ballot box for what he said about his community, because somebody who thinks he's the mayor of a town of domestic terrorists, he shouldn't have that job. You should be the most proud of your community, and he's clearly not.
Well, here's the thing. I asked them that question. If you say that 70% of them are domestic terrorists, does it mean that you think that you are the mayor of a terrorism supporting town? He said, if you want to flip it that way, that's fine. But anyways, if you actually do the math for a second, 70% of 250 is 175. So it means that in his community, 175 of the people were supporting so-called domestic terrorism, and only 75% were opposed to the Coutts movement.
This is what I found so confusing about his testimony, because he said this during the testimony, and then in his closing statement, he was like, yeah, like I support them. Like I totally support them. It was just when it started to affect my village, and locals were impacted. I was like, that's a real Alberta thing. Like this is just a really big family to say that. And then he goes and backpedals again. And he's like, but yeah, they're basically like domestic terrorists though, like the ones that were blocking the highway. It's like, what? Make up your mind, please. Just make up your mind.
I'll give him credit for answering the questions, because he was at least able to answer the questions.
Well, he's the mayor of Coutts. We'll just come find him. Answer the question, answer the questions, or we're coming to Coutts again. But it's funny that he accused the truckers of inconveniencing the town of Coutts, because really at the end of the day, as our trucker documentary shows, it wasn't the people of Coutts being inconvenienced by the blockade by the truckers. It was the people of Coutts being inconvenienced by the blockades put up by the RCMP, which were preventing people from coming in to the slightly larger town of Milk River. They were being cut off and starved out. They couldn't get supplies. They wouldn't bring in diesel. It wouldn't bring in cardlock trucks, so diesel trucks. They were being cut off by the RCMP. And that's what the inconvenience was. We have people in Kian Simone's documentary saying they couldn't get their nurse to come in on the highway because of the RCMP blockades. RCMP that caused the inconvenience at Coutts, and not the truckers. They were letting ambulances through. They were letting other trucks through. They were letting the school bus through, because like I said, it operates as one town, the two communities. It wasn't the truckers who were the domestic terrorists, if we're going to stick a label there. Might have been the RCMP causing all the problems down there, which means that I have a beautiful segue into the next clip about Coutts, because right now in Alberta, our new Premier Daniel Smith is like, maybe we better get a provincial police force. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to spend the money, but I also don't want Justin Trudeau's RCMP around here enforcing his gun laws. I'm listening. But then when I heard this, I'm like, yep, kick them all out right now. Give the existing RCMP who live and work here right of first refusal for those jobs, but get rid of them all. And this is why. We've got a clip about undercover cops bringing guns to the blockade. Let's show that clip, please.
This is so good.
Olivia, call her right there.
Of detail.
Okay. Was it your understanding that that group, their plot was to have two females smuggle in a hockey bag a whole bunch of guns into the protest? Is that what your understanding was?
I have actually no understanding of the undercover operations or the intelligence gathering operations of the RCMP. The level of detail that I was briefed at was really of the existence of threats within the group that were potentially more violent, and that they had the intelligence to indicate that they were armed and planning to do violence in relation to the police should any enforcement action take place.
Right, but are you after the fact aware that the two females that they were intending to have smuggle in these firearms were actually two undercover RCMP officers?
I apologize, I just have no detail in terms of the actual criminal file or the investigation itself. Quite carefully avoided that level of interaction with the police and kept it at a higher level.
He very carefully avoided that level of interaction with police. He says very carefully, so as not to be incriminated potentially.
We call that plausible deniability, because the less you know, the less you can be forced to testify to. And it sounds as though it was entrapment and they were using women to do it, which is the old honeypot trick. You use women to entrap men, which is gross, by the way, gross policing. And having them smuggle in guns to sort of entrap the people in the convoy. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. When I hear that, I'm like, yeah, get them all out. Get every single one of Justin Trudeau's RCMP out, the good cops, and there's a ton of them out here, especially in the rural communities, because they have to live and work in the communities. Their kids play hockey with you. They don't like this stuff. You meet them down at the gun range. They're normal people who believe in law and order and charter rights. I don't think they want to be associated with this kind of stuff. I definitely don't. So, when Danielle Smith says it's going to be a little expensive to kick these guys out, I don't care. Get them out. Get them out. I don't want any part of them.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, William agrees. It's unanimous for sure, but since this is the province that I'm going to be living in, I do live in, I feel like I'm so far away in like a wonderland over here in Ottawa, 100% get them out. When, again, every time he takes to the stand, there's just like this, everyone's holding their breath. They don't know what Miller's going to do, what he's going to say, what the outcome is going to be. I was honestly shocked. I was shocked. Tweeting this out, I was like, this is the best thing that's happened in the last 5 hours. 100%. That's so big. But of course, it's not shocking that he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what's going on ever. It's like, what position? Why are you in the position that you're in? Who put you there? Yeah. Is this still more self-appointed bureaucrats? It's like, if you're not there in that depth of level of operation that's going down, why are you even testifying? What do you have to provide that somebody below you couldn't do themselves, who was actually on the ground? It's ridiculous.
Do you two Albertans think that the Coutts blockade would have been dealt differently with a provincial police force?
100%.
100%. Although I will give them credit for the obviously hinky things that some people in the RCMP, and I'll give that RCMP brass as opposed to the local detachment. Outside of that, like the stuff that we just heard, the reason I say give the existing RCMP members right of first refusal for those jobs in a provincial police force here in Alberta is because outside of that, the cops were really good. Really, really good. And you can see that on the last day of the blockade, where it's shaking hands, it's hugging, it's decency, because they live and work in those communities. They know those people on the other side of the blockade from them are not criminals. They're good people. They're their neighbors. Their kids go to school together. And that's what I think. It's a little bit different in rural communities because you have a lot more closeness to the cops than you do in the city. You might not know the cops there, but it's different. And I think it would have been handled much, much differently had it been a provincial police force.
Definitely. And we did also see from Marco van Hugenbos' his testimony as well, that he clarified on multiple occasions how good of a rapport they had between them, the RCMP officers, the protesters that were there in Coutts and in Milk River. Again, there was like, at the end of the day, the charges that they're facing are absolutely ridiculous and heinous. But what happened outside of that, because that just happened in a very short amount of time as well. Those arrests came on the night of the 13th. So early in the morning on the 14th, when the Emergencies Act was invoked, that had nothing to do with the invocation of the Emergencies Act, because the Coutts blockade had already been, it was dissolved at that time. They were packing up, they were leaving, they were doing their due diligence to make sure that they had all of that huge machinery be taken out, because it's a process. People have to remember that the conditions were insane. The snow, the cold, the black ice on the roads. You're driving massive trailers, tractors, and semis out of those areas. It's not going to be lickety split on a dime. But as they moved out within hours, that's when those arrests took place. And I think it's horrible. And I do want to see justice for them and accountability.
And we know in Alberta, we never needed the Emergencies Act because we have the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, under which Pastor Art Pawlowski was charged for giving a sermon. But we do have a law that's designed initially to stop eco-terrorists from dismantling pipelines and attacking work sites with hatchets, as they do in northern British Columbia. But we have that law here, and it would apply to major highways as well. We didn't use that. We just didn't need it to deal with the truckers. Apparently we needed it to deal with a pesky pastor, though, which doesn't make any sense. But we definitely didn't need the Emergencies Act, and the Alberta government has intervened in the commission to say as much. I think Olivia is telling me that we need to wrap up. You guys have stuff to do, I'm sure. Thank you, Celine, for working. This is a statutory holiday here in Alberta. But you're out there in, I guess, Ontario, where they don't actually care about veterans. At least the government, not the people. Don't write me letters. Guys, thanks so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for doing the live stream every night. It's difficult to do an hour of live TV every single day and think on your feet. Thanks, Olivia and Efron, for putting the show together all the time. I realize it is also difficult, and you're doing other things at the company too. Thanks so much to everybody who's tuning in. Thanks for staying with us as we are over halfway done what we're calling the Trucker Commission. If you'd like to see all of our previous coverage and support the work that these two superstars are doing in Ottawa, please go to truckercommission.ca. I think that's everything, guys. Let's sign off. You guys go do whatever you're going to do. Work, obviously. I know it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And as David Menzies always says, stay sane.